Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and if footy is a game of inches, then a fraction of an inch might just be the difference between the Demons playing a final at home or playing a final away. In any event, we haven't sewn up a top 4 berth and the double chance, so the next 2 weeks will help decide the fate of the Demons in 2023. Joining me tonight to discuss this game of inches and millimetres is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to all the Demonland listeners. Well, this week was all about the number 4 for us. A top 4 finish is now under threat. A 4-point loss in the match. We potentially lost pick 4 in the draft. Let's hope that the podcast doesn't go for 4 hours when we start talking about the umpiring.
That's a certainty. I just said to you before, I sort of disconnected from sort of social media. I was off Demonland a bit. I was a bit angry about the game, and it didn't occur to me that we lost pick 4. Now you've just spoiled my night even more.
For Christ's sake.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Things
it's made it even worse now for Andy. That's him. He's off the show.
I thought things
How
could
can
not...
you lose something you never got?
I know, but I had it in my hot little hands already. I'd already spent it. I'd spent it.
We were going to get Harley Reid. There goes Harley Reid. There goes
he's gone.
Well, who wants pick 5?
The rest of the decade.
Also joining us tonight to assure us that not all is lost, including pick 4, and that we're still favourites for the flag, is Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Demonlanders. Good evening, George. Good evening, Andy. Of course, all is not lost. It's remarkable. I wish people would stop this each week as some sort of litmus test. Let's buy into the media narrative palaver. Of course, all is not lost. It was an amazing game of footy. We were super impressive, and the Blues were super impressive. Could not have been more impressed with them, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Well, we will definitely get into that. But before, we've got some housekeeping to do. So each week I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We absolutely love the feedback. We'll read it out on the show. And the 5 stars really do help boost the podcast and get more people listening. WLS Mojo writes, Champagne Commentary, an incredibly entertaining and insightful podcast. If you're sick of the media commentators' shallow analysis and hype, then this is the place for you. Their in-depth analysis really makes you understand how the team is going. They can show you why a loss wasn't as bad or why a win wasn't as good as you think based on their breakdown of the game. Really stays on topic and fun to listen to, and they always inject their optimism, well, not me, to the show, even in the darkest of times. Great show. Thank you for that review, Mojo. I hope tonight's podcast is cathartic. Demonologist writes, so much praise, but so well deserved. There are other Demon podcasts, but this is the one to listen to. The absolute passion and commitment to the club and players is evident. George, Andy and B-Man bring different qualities to complement each other. This allows a much fuller understanding of what's going on at the club, as much as can be discerned from the outside. But thorough explanations of tactics and strategy backed up by statistical analysis and especially discussion around players and their roles and responsibilities are debated fully. If you need to understand what's likely going on with the Melbourne team, reasons for results and an understanding of why the results are occurring and what the future might hold, just listen to this podcast. And if your MFCSS is getting the better of you, then listen to this podcast and as the only inoculation that's required. Cheers, boys. Well, thank you, Demonologist. We really appreciate the review. And from the podcast thread on Demonland, we have a little poem from Demonized. This podcast that's all red and blue, a mustn't miss all D's review. Bimman's a tactician, George has erudition, and Andy's heart always beats true. That was beautiful, Demonized. Thank you. Keep the feedback and the poems coming. Please give us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts. And please don't forget to click the write a review link and write that review as well as the 5 stars, and we will read them out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show, which is exactly what Amy did on Instagram. Amy B on Instagram says, loved your analysis and shout out for A and B. He is my favourite player and can't believe fans see him as anything but amazing. Well, no problem, Amy, and thanks for listening. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and or your preferred podcasting app, the Demonland podcast is now available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. You'll be able to view the podcast with our cartoon likenesses displayed when each of us are talking. We don't want to break the internet by displaying our real mugs, so the cartoons will have to suffice. We also got some feedback from people watching last week's podcast on YouTube, so keep the comments coming. We'll give you a shout out on the podcast. And don't forget to like each video and subscribe to our channel. Here are some comments from YouTube from last week's show. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 writes, another great podcast, guys. Brilliant analysis of the game and the team. Thanks, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝘁. 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘀𝘁 writes, Andy, George and B-Man, brilliant analysis as always. Have listened since the days of 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 and the pod has gotten better and better over the years. Love seeing over 2 hours of listening as it covers my drive to and from work for a couple of days. Thanks, guys. 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘀𝘁, Demonland member. Thank you, 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘀𝘁, and great to have a Demonland member providing us feedback on YouTube. So if you are a Demonland member, get on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and give us a like for the video. Will writes, a ripper podcast, first stop for any Demons fanatic. Being a Perth-based supporter, this pod and Demonland provides me with my sense of community. Can't thank the boys enough. Well, thanks for the feedback, Will, and I'm glad that we can provide a place for Ds all around the country and around the world to discuss this club. If you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Ds fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, there are also multiple topics and threads discussing all things Demons related, so join up to join in on the conversation. If you'd like to join us tonight on the air to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 9016 3666. I'll put you on mute and bring you on when there is a break in our conversation. During the week, you can, of course, call that number, leave us a message, and we'll play it on the show. If you're listening to us live right now, get in the chat room, head on over to demonland.com/podcast, and we'll try to read out some of your comments and questions that you have. We are live every Monday, so if you do want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. So I'll get straight into the match wrap-up now. I usually carve out enough time during the day to put this show together, including providing a wrap-up of the match, but I was absolutely flat out all day with meetings and whatnot, and was pushing excrement up a hill to get everything done in time. So this week, with George's permission, perhaps I will read through his match report from the game, which I guess, George, is that all right?
It's your show. You do what you want, Andy.
Well, I guess it is a bit of advertising to one of the great features on Demonland, and that is the match reports and previews of our games that we provide each week and have been for the past 23 years. So a big thank you and a shout out to George, of course, and the Oracle, Whispering Jack, and Casey from Casey for his Casey match reports. So George's match report this week was aptly titled Fingernail. And a fingernail really was the difference between winning an AFL match and holding on to second place on the ladder.
Maybe, assuming the fingernail touched it.
Well, we'll get into that a bit later on, B-Man. But I have my thoughts on this too. So the fingernail was the difference between the second spot on the ladder or a spot in the next stage of the FIFA Women's World Cup, while one Carlton Blues player had a fingernail long enough, or maybe not according to Big Man, to deny a Melbourne victory. Les Blues had bitten theirs down along with a lot of Australian fans in a dramatic penalty shootout. Was the Petrarca kick touched or not? Which way does a deflection from the woodwork go? It matters no more because the decision, Bin Man, has been made and one team of Blues goes home happy while the other just goes home. Melbourne was on the other end of a nail-biting finish in a game and certainly had multiple chances in the dying minutes of the game to take the victory. But when playing against sides like Carlton, who sit fifth on the ladder, these are the games which are typical of the finals football that is to come. The match will always come down to one or two critical moments. The coach himself said after the match that it is important to win those moments. The Demons didn't and have paid the price. And once again, with rain falling in this match, the Demons failed. Almost every loss by the team has been in slippery or wet conditions. We've got more to talk about that a bit later on. In some games, it was a failure to adapt to play the wet weather football, but like this game, it just causes a drop-off in slickness needed to transit the ball to the attacking end of the ground. The Demons got off to a poor start in the game and scored a solitary goal from barely half a dozen entries into the forward 50. Unfortunately, their defenders denied Carlton again and again, so come the end of the first quarter, both sides had only bothered the goal umpires once each. The second quarter was much the same, and the two teams went into the break with 3 majors each and 2 points separating them. It was to be a portent of the end result. The match was simply being played between the arcs and with over 50 inside 50s for each side and only 6 goals. It certainly wasn't a game to be watched by the spectators, but most of them were watching the shootout at another game on their phones. Finally, in the third quarter, things started to happen. Australia had won the soccer and everyone, including the players, returned their concentration to playing real football. I like that one, George. More goals kicked in one quarter than in the previous half, but once again, both sides were level pegging and there promised to be a nail-biting shootout in the final stanza. Well, that proved to be the case, and Melbourne gave the Blues a mighty step up in the opening minutes when they simply waltzed the ball out of the middle and put themselves 18 points up, which was the highest margin for the night. And to their credit, the Demons clawed their way back with yet another miraculous goal to 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀𝗁, followed by a great mark and a straight kick from Joel Smith, and they were back in it. A gimme chance to 𝗍𝗶𝗀𝗁𝗀𝗁 surprisingly fell short, and then the Petrarca shot was adjudged to have been touched on the line. A 4-point victory to the Baggers. All around the ground, there were great contests. Steven May probably won the fight against 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀𝗁, only allowing him 2 goals. He was ably assisted by Jake Lever with 12 intercept possessions. Still, the Carlton Smalls were winning the match for them, so we saw Michael Hibbert introduced to quell the rot, and that he did. As the coach noted, it wasn't a night for forwards, and the 𝗠𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗁𝗀𝗁 experiment was repeated with no positive outcome. More on that later. A paltry 3 marks between the two players for the match is not what is expected and certainly not needed. While Gawn dominated the ruck hitouts, the outcome was not to the team's advantage, and it was no surprise that the final quarter comeback from the Demons occurred when Grundy was in the ruck. More importantly, the same experiment utterly failed when both players went forward. Does anybody remember them getting a single touch in that area? Once again, they just clog up the space, and it caused the coach to move Smith to the forward line to get some presence up there. It couldn't be left to a 20-year-old Jacob van Rooyen alone, who was battling against Wiedering, one of the best backs in the league. With the fingernails well and truly bitten down to the base, the Demon fans have nothing left now for the 2 final matches. A game against a revitalised Hawthorn and another against Sydney in the Harbour City, who are fighting for a final space, and it's just going to be more of the same. Or will the comprehensive victories against these two sides allow sufficient growth for those with a severe case of MFC-SS to endure the final series? And George, I can't help but think that last line was directed directly at me. Well, thank you, George, for another great match report. You can read George's match reports and our previews and 𝗍𝗶𝗀𝗁𝗀𝗁 reviews each week exclusively on Demonland.com. And since those were your words, George, I might go to B-Man first. Give some thoughts on the game. Keep in mind what we're going to be talking about later.
I'll give more detail later on because it's a question specifically about the game itself. But just an overall thing, it was there was a comment from Brendan Goddard I listened to on the radio afterwards, and I put the radio on. That was an interesting thing for me. I never listen to anything after a game when we lose, and the fact that I did, and it was an indication that we played brilliantly in that match. And Brendan Goddard said words to the effect that Melbourne will lose no admirers. They played brilliantly. And I, without a word of a lie, I thought to myself, well, that may be true for any objective people out there, but it won't be true of a lot of Melbourne fans and a lot of Demonland posters. And sure enough, I thought we played brilliantly. Of course, we didn't get the points. I happened to watch the last year's game before I went to the game. And we, that was another tussle, like a tight game all day that we got over the line with 𝗍𝗍𝗀𝗁𝗀𝗁 goal. Everyone thinks, well, that's a great win. That's why expected scores are so significant for the clubs. That's why Goody's been having the expected score on the top of the boards all year. I went to Casey on the weekend, and expected score was on the top of there, is to keep the players focused on, making sure that their metrics, that they know where they are in the game. I thought we played brilliantly. I thought it was the best game of footy I've seen in a long time in terms of intensity. The numbers, and I'll talk to them in a second, are off the charts. By far, they're as intense a game pressure-wise as the Port Collingwood game that everyone talks about as such an epic. My big concern is coming up from it for next week, but I think we're in good shape fitness-wise. A brilliant game of footy. I was furious. I was absolutely furious, but not as a completely different feeling to how I left the MCG last year when, for instance, the Pies beat us. or even when we beat the Blues last year, because I walked away feeling like, we were running out of petrol in that game, and then the Pies game, and of course in the Brisbane Swans game, same feeling. I didn't leave like that. I left the ground and walked away from the ground furious, really, at the umpiring. I thought it had a huge impact on the game, and of course and we'll talk about it, the decision on the goal. So it was a mixed emotions for me, but there's lots of things that we can improve, obviously, but it doesn't dent my confidence one little bit on our flag answers, except for what it means for where we play that first week. And personally, I don't care where we play except the Gabba. So I'm happy if we go to Adelaide, we'll beat Port, but I'm not keen on going to the Gabba, obviously. So, I thought we were brilliant, and I was somewhat surprised at the negativity on Demonland about our performance. And, it's all about the W or the L, isn't it? And if it's a L, people, seem to disregard the play, except for objective commentators like Brendan Goddard.
George? Nothing
much more to add. That it was a game between two clubs in the top five, effectively. You got to expect it. It was, as Bin Man said, it was almost a repeat of last year's game against them. We won that one. We lost this one. It's what we're going to expect in finals in coming weeks. I don't think there's too many other sides apart from the top five at the moment who are going to really challenge us, but Carlton were a challenger, and we've just got to accept that they were a good side, and they just got over the line on the night. If that goal of Petrarca's had been adjudged to have been a goal, then we'd all be having a different story. But it's still the same. Carlton are serious challengers and will be a serious challenge in the final series. So,
absolutely, George. And the thing is, again, I just urge everyone to listen to Goody and try to cut through his talk. He's not a great communicator. Just listen to his key messages. He said a number of times in the lead up and afterwards is the Blues play the right type of footy, and that's our type of footy. As I said last week, Voss basically mid-season, they've based their whole game on Melbourne. And then when I talk to the stats in a sec, they are just reflected in the stats that are almost identical. And the gap between us is so marginal. They were awesome. And, I really think that it's the three clubs who play that, but particularly Melbourne and Blues have got the best game plan, the best ability to apply pressure, and the best defensive system, which wins grand finals. So an amazing game of football from that perspective, but it won't be easy to come up from next week because, it takes a lot out of players, as I think we saw with the Port Collingwood epic. That was an epic game of footy. So was this. It flattened both Port and Pies for weeks after that. So I'm really confident we're pretty fit at the moment, but we're going to need to be against the Hawks next week, who will look to run us off our feet for sure.
Well, B-Man, you may as well get into those numbers right now in part of your stats files, so take it away.
So as I say, we play a really similar brand of footy, the D's and the Blues. The DNA of both teams is pressure, contest, forward half footy, intensity at the ball carrier, really, strong defensive system, set deep, very, very similar. I really like Brendan Sanderson. He does that Thursday strategy session on Waitley's show on SEN. But last week it was really weird. He said that Melbourne wanted a fast transitional, free-flowing game, whereas Carlton will want methodical stoppage and scoring from contests. And I was like, what? That's just so not the case. And so I was, I don't normally do it, but I texted in and I wrote, well, I like Sando, but with all due respect, he's wrong. And that, we will play exactly like that. What he described how Carlton were going to play is exactly what our game plan is. Unfortunately, they didn't read it out, but it's exactly how it panned out. The game was two very similar styles, and the stats reflect this. So just going through some of the key stats for me, this one is a big one. The disposal efficiency was 66 to 72. Doesn't sound like much, but it's a fair bit in a game where you only lose by 4 points. The kicking efficiency was the one, 59%, 0.6 that we hit in 64. So they were better by foot marginally. Meters gained, we were 120 meters gained down, which was a huge win for them. Big territory, as I said, is critical to both teams. Inside 50, we were -5 down, which I'll get back to a bit later. But -5 down is incredible, given what it was after the first quarter. But I'll speak about that a bit later. Shots on goal, we had 4 more shots on goal. Shots on goal per inside 50, 39.6 to 28.3. So we were better in that sense. Contested possessions, and this was a huge one. We never dropped below them on contested possessions the whole game. We ended up +8, but it didn't go much more. It was in this band between us being up. We were always up for the entire game, even though it may not have felt like that watching it because they dominated the first quarter. So I thought that first quarter was tactically really fascinating. Ground ball gets were almost spot on level. They had we were down 1, so that's ground ball gets is particularly on a wet, slippery night. You might think that it's an area we got smashed in. That's just not the case. Intercepts was a really interesting one, 77 to 80. So we were down 3 on that. They did really well to cause intercepts. Again, most of that damage was in the first quarter and a half in terms of their intercepting. Centre clearances, we were down 3. That was, it's an interesting question, and George will probably talk to that a bit later in terms of Grundy and Gawns, how they looked. Their rucking. I thought Grundy, he was criticised a fair bit on Demonland, and I thought he had a good game, actually. Particularly, I thought he rucked better than Max, to be honest. Stoppage clearances, we were +5. Contested marks, +2. Marks inside 50, we were down 3, so that was 7 to 10, and I thought that was a really crucial number on the night. They moved the ball better than us, and I thought they handled they had some really good clean handling, but also they took their chances going forward a little bit better, not hugely amount. We were +30 in hitouts, which is huge, but only +8 in hitouts to advantage, and I think that tells a bit of a tale in terms of they went to work on our ruck setup. So I thought tackles inside 50 for me, this was probably just about. Turnover and this are the 2 stats that really, I think, where we lost the game. We were -13 for tackles inside 50, and their forward half pressure, we talked about it last week, they're small players, they were brilliant. Like I really was blown away by their forward half pressure, and we couldn't match them in that space. That I think was really the difference. Defensive one-on-one loss, we lost 21.4 of our one-on-one defensive losses to 9.1. So that was another really critical stat, I thought. I still think, some of our players struggle one-on-one. Steve May's great when he can wrestle, but, he gets beaten a fair bit for a player of his standard. And Lever also is not a great one-on-one player either. This one we'll talk about in, probably more sort of generally later, but the pressure numbers were bananas in this game. So for the match, it was 200. I'm pretty sure, I didn't have time to check, but I'm pretty sure it's the only time we've averaged 200 for the entire match. Remembering 200 is considered elite. They were 206 for the match, which is just unbelievable. So 200 to 206 is grand final-like pressure. That's preliminary final-like pressure. In fact, it's more preliminary final because often the grand finals, certainly for instance, our grand final win was much lower pressure than that by way of comparison. First quarter, so we've been criticised a fair bit for that first quarter, but it was 196 in that first quarter. They were 224. So it's not as if we didn't come out to play. They were just phenomenal. 224 is off the charts. That's just nuts. So we actually dropped back in the second quarter, 185. They kept it at 201. 207, we brought the rating up in the third quarter, 197. In the last quarter, and this is such an important stat for me, this tells me we are heading in the right direction. They dropped. They at 202, they went up. They raised their ratings. We went to 214 in that quarter. That is unbelievable. In this corresponding game last year, we were dropping. Our pressure was dropping against Collingwood. It fell away. I forget to 170 or something in the last quarter. So we are running out matches really, really well. The analogy I've used in previous years, I think, is really a good one in terms of thinking about the pressure. Thinking of the pressure like rowing and upping your meters, and that it felt like that the whole game, that we were progressively putting them under pressure, progressively getting the game on our terms, and that's how it really looked. Clayton Oliver, there's some talk about how rusty he was. This is nuts. He is an incredible player, but this is a player who's been out, how many games? 11 he missed?
10.
10. So he's come back. He's had 42 pressure acts to top the charts, 106. His season average is 58. He's almost doubled his season average pressure rating. Now, the whole game was pressure. So Jack Viney, number 2, Angus Brayshaw, number 3. They're our leaders. Tommy Sparrow in 4th, and Christian Petrarca in 5th, and Pickett 𝗍𝗲𝗁 then in 6th. So that's our real leaders, and Sparrow's becoming a real leader in that space. Every single one of those players I mentioned had almost double their normal pressure rating. This is elite level finals-like football. Very few teams in the AFL would have been able to go with us putting this sort of pressure on, and very few teams would have been able to deal with Carlton's pressure the way we dealt with it. And I think that hasn't been a lot of. I don't think fans have given us that enough credit from that space. Scores from turnover are really interesting. It ended up 2 our way. So why that's really interesting, I think, is that one of the things that in that first quarter is that their pressure was unbelievable. Now we'll talk a bit about our skill errors in the wet a bit later. But one of the things, that in that first quarter, the pressure, I think, was they were up. I think, what was it in the first quarter? 76-24. So to get it back on terms 50-50 for the end of the game total was amazing in terms of getting it back. But the scores from turnover were 33 points of their first 41 points Blues scored were on turnover. So they didn't score after their last 24 points. So that was halfway through the third quarter. It was 33 points from 41 they'd scored on turnover from their total. That means they didn't score any more from turnover for the rest of the game from halfway through the third quarter, which is really phenomenal. That means just another indication that we were coming in that match. We were rolling over them. We were dominating. We just couldn't put it on the scoreboard. And there's a question about our finishing, and I think a bit later, I think is a good one. Points from defensive half were 34-24, so we actually did it pretty well from the back half. Some interesting stats, I thought. Jack Viney had 30 disposals for the 6th time this season. It's his most 30 disposal performances in a season. Before this came in 2016 when he achieved it 7 times. He's got 2 more games. He'll break his all-time record in terms of the number of games where he's got 30-plus disposal if he gets to the last 2 games. 𝗍𝗲𝗁𝘀𝗁 leads the club for goals, score, assists, and total scoreboard impact since round 18, which I thought was interesting. As I said, the 33 points from turnover that they got, they didn't get any more from halfway through the third quarter. So I thought that was a real good indication of the pressure that we applied and the fact that we kept on coming at them.
I think it was. I'll just make one quick comment, if that's all right, Bin Man and Andy. What the number that really stood out for me in this game, and it's indicative of what finals is about, was tackles. I expect tackles and pressure to be up in a wet weather game simply because the ball doesn't move as freely. But it was 88-87, and looked at the Collingwood Geelong game. I looked at the Adelaide Brisbane game. Top level teams. Our total was about, for the 2 teams, was about 170. Those other 2 games for the total for tackles was about 120.
Yeah,
it was 30% more tackles in this game. It was a brutal game.
It was a totally brutal game, George.
Yeah, and I struggled to find any other match for the whole season that had that level of intensity in it. It was just amazing.
Well, totally good call, because I was going to talk about this later in terms of there's a question about the pressure. 174 tackles it ended up on, and that's the most tackles there's been this season. The previous highest in any other game was 172.
Yeah,
and I don't know what that game was, but it wasn't a Pies game, so it wasn't the Pies Port game. So that is unbelievable. And just if people didn't go to the game, and I'm not sure, I haven't been able to watch the replay yet. I'm not sure whether it was evident, but it was raining the whole game. It was like most of it, 90% of the game, there was this funny misty rain that you actually couldn't even see from the Ponsford stand properly unless you looked into the lights. But I got there at 4:30 for the soccer and watched the soccer. It rained pretty steadily and relatively heavily for at least 2.5 hours. So the ground was sodden and it never stopped raining. So I think that's a big factor. The other thing I'd just say about the first quarter, so the inside, that's where the stat, I got lost there a little bit, but we ended up inside 50s, almost breaking even, which is incredible because we were down 20 or something in that first quarter. So
I think at halftime it was 37-16.
Yeah, and it was 20. I think we were down 20 at quarter time, which I doubt is it never happened. I would think that's never happened in Goody's career at Melbourne. It was phenomenal. But
it was 15-5 at one stage in the first quarter.
Yeah, so people might think, well, that's a sign of their dominance. And I heard someone on the radio say, oh, well, Carlton should have been 4 or 5 goals up. That's absolutely not the case. The expected score is the other one. We won the game by 2 points on expected score, and I'm presuming they factor in goal umpiring error in that. But the expected score after the first quarter was only +4 their way. So it wasn't that they missed their chances. Of course, they had a dominant quarter in terms of their ability to get inside. But as I said, our pressure was right up there. We never dropped below parity on contested numbers. I think what's missed in it is how brilliant our defence was. Our defence was amazing. And I watched the Matildas game, obviously. In the first 10 minutes of the second half of the Matildas game, they came out and the Matildas were dominant, and they were unbelievable that they didn't score. The reason they didn't score was how brilliant the French defence was. And it was exactly the same in the first quarter for the D's. And, as we'll talk a bit later, defence wins grand finals. That's why I rate the Blues so highly. That's why I rate the D's so highly. That's why I've got major question marks over Port and Pies, because they've got very, very vulnerable defences, as their for and against percentage shows.
All right, well, let's get into the listener questions part of the program. We're going to start with the umpiring and the arc. Clintosaurus wants a 10-minute rant about the umpires and arc, please. Gunners follows up with yes, please, and then collectively draft the please explain letter to the umpiring department. 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏 says crucial non-calls that cost us dearly at the death, aside from the track non-goal. Oliver held at stoppage in the square. Langdon held on half-forward flank. JVR tunnelled on the half-forward flank. Umpiring doesn't alone cost you a game, but I was frustrated with the way the umpires refused to make calls late in the game other than deliberate out of bounds. Didn't help either that I had a truly obnoxious Carlton fan next to me who accidentally punched me in the leg while celebrating. Sorry about laughing about that, 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗏. Thanks again, Andy, George and B-Man, for what I'm sure will be yet another amazing pod. Nairobi Demon echoes 2 of those non-call free kicks. Clary's holding the ball that wasn't at the beginning of the second half that gave them a goal. JVR clearly tripped in the last few minutes. Titus Toddy says the Carlton players says he touched it. If he did, then all is well. But if by chance he is lying, then the Carlton curse is set and serves them right. Now, look, I love to have a bitch and a moan about the umpires as much as anybody, and it's easy to view games through the lenses of our red and blue glasses, but in any game, unless the free kick count is criminally lopsided, you could read the comments from the other side of the fence and get all the frees that were missed for your opponent. And yes, some of the ones mentioned were howlers, and we'll never know what the result of the match might have been, if it would have been any different if all of them were paid. And look, I've always said the ones that kill me the most are the ones that aren't paid. And I heard Carlton fans claiming Trax handballed to Nibbler for his goal was a throw. Had we won the game, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this, George. Keeping aside the track non-goal, what did you think about the umpiring in general?
I got this job because if we give it to Bin Man, we'll be here for most of the night. So, yeah, look, I have to agree. The umpiring, it doesn't really affect. In this game, it really didn't affect either side, simply because there are calls that weren't made. What really upsets me is the non-calls, and it's becoming a habit within the umpiring fraternity. It's easier not to make a call than to make a call and be proven wrong. There are certain umpires in the game at the moment who have developed a whole career out of this. All they ever do is call play on, play on, play on. Won't name any names, but you can go out and listen to other games or even our own game this week and you'll find out who I'm talking about. There's a couple of them are doing it all the time. I think the difficulty and the standards of primarily, we've talked about this before, is because they're not professional. the AFL refuses to, in a billion dollar business, to invest properly in umpiring schools and allow these guys to do the job full time. I was less concerned about the umpiring as such. Let's talk about the ARC one later, than the example in the Collingwood-Geelong game this round, where Jeremy Carriman, while outside the boundary line, handballed the ball to another Geelong player who was even further outside the boundary line, and then gave it back to Cameron, who subsequently put a goal through. We had 4 umpires on the ground and 2 boundary umpires, and none of them, 6 umpires, failed to realise that the ball was out as soon as he handballed it.
The boundary umpire was right there.
Yeah. And that, we'll talk about this later on, but that is a classic example of when the ARC should be used to deny those absolute howlers. Not an example of what we saw on the weekend in our own game. So yeah, it's really sad. We talk about this every year, but until they invest properly in the umpiring schools, whatever they've got going at the moment, and invest in full-time umpires, we're going to get repeats of the same sort of stuff all the time.
I'll leave my rant to the ARC, but my general feeling about the umpiring in the game was, again, it's this thing. It's that I don't blame the umpires. I blame the AFL.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to know is what the hell has happened to holding the ball. Like it is just the game is changing before our eyes because they're not paying holding the ball, and it's so frustrating because inevitably one gets paid. And so there was that. The other one was the mind-boggling decision, the delay in paying the free kick to Rivers when he was slung tackle. Now, that was the textbook sling tackle. They might as well put that up as the video as the example. And Razor Ray stood and waited for someone else to make the call, which I think this fourth umpire, I've heard that it's one of the benefits is it allows everyone to do less running so that they can make better decisions. Well, they've got to make decisions. And he turned to allow, I'm not sure who ended up paying it, but it looked he looked away.
Yeah, Ray went back to the umpire who was further away, as if to say, you make the decision for me. Ray was less than 20 metres certainly away from her, but the other umpire was 50 metres away, but he wouldn't make the decision himself. And this was what I was saying about these non-decisions. Yeah, it's an easy one. Do it.
Exactly. And you've talked about this before, George, that's the difference between a really good umpire and an average one. They've got the courage to make the call, and he normally would. So that was really strange. And the weird thing about that is Melbourne fans started baying because it was such an obvious free kick to Rivers. And then there was this delay and they finally did pay it. And then the Blues fans went bananas. So they managed to really annoy and make 2 sets of fans angry, which was some effort. The other one, I was in the Ponsford stand and it happened right below me, was late in the game. I just cannot believe it because there was another textbook one, and there was 2 umpires. There was an umpire on the boundary line side and there was another one on the other when JVR had his legs taken out of him. That was dangerous. That was exactly why that rule was brought in, because remember Rowan, there was a thought that he broke his leg. That was exactly the same scenario. And for the first time, a lot of the Melbourne players were looking really frustrated, turning around, looking at the umpires. And the other one, there was 2 others that really frustrated me. The one against 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 to not in the marking contest. When they mark the footy, that's never paid. He was a bigger opponent, critical point in the game. It's all about territory, the game, and would have come back inside 50. Instead, all the pressure's relieved, goes away. And then you see other games where, like I watched 10 minutes of the St Kilda game, and King gets a goal square infringement where he's just, barely touched. The other one was in the last 30 seconds or even less, the last 15 seconds, is Maxi had 4 players hanging onto him. There was so much, again, that was right below me. It was ridiculous. He was getting scragged so badly. And Bowie didn't get, he got paid for scragging when he marked. Maxi doesn't get paid. It's just so frustrating. But again, I don't blame the umpires. I blame the AFL.
Yeah, I suspect what happens when they go for the umpires' reviews are that they go, you're wrong about that one, you're wrong about that one. And if you don't call anything, you don't get criticised for it.
Yeah, that's right. And, that's exactly right. It's so frustrating.
Well, B-Man, you wanted to now talk about Track's the ARC decision. You've provided some audio. Do you want me to? Do you want to talk it up before I play it?
Yeah. So this clip I didn't hear. I don't listen to the radio and haven't watched the replay. So I happened to listen to this afternoon, and I vented on Demonland, which I'll read in a bit, so I capture it all, so I get through it. But I heard this today, and my blood boiled just all over again. So it was on the show that I really, really like, Grandstand Footy Sunday. It's fantastic. Unfortunately, on this week, Chad Wingard wasn't on it, and he's normally on it. He's really fantastic, Chad Wingard, on this show, but he did his Achilles, a poor bugger. So he's out of footy for 12 months, which is just awful news. And but yeah, so they talk about it, and then it's about 90 seconds of the actual call in the game.
The controversial moment at the finish, this is how it unfolded on Grandstand AFL last night.
To Rivers, gets around Charlie Curnow, has a bounce on the wing to half forward, Petrarca marks, 52 out from goal, he wheels around, he eyes the sticks, he sends it towards the goal line, he's got the distance! Christian Petrarca with the long bomb, but we've got to go upstairs to check.
It's good,
Jess.
It's
Soft
good.
call. Wait for the soft call. No, soft call's touched.
Joking.
Wowee.
None of the Carlton players are
I'm not sure the
claiming,
Carlton players thought they did. Or maybe Caleb Marchbank has clipped his finger.
No, he would have.
But we're going to need really conclusive evidence.
Yeah, how are they going to overturn it?
His fingers don't move.
Wowee.
This is a moment.
It's a goal.
This goal will put Melbourne in front with less than a minute to go.
I mean, how do you overturn it?
I don't think you can overturn it.
You can't. That's why
There
it's
is
soft call.
There's no.
Look at that.
Oh.
No, it's a goal. It's a goal. He did not touch it with his left hand.
Oh,
That's why he cannot give these soft calls. Are so ridiculous.
I don't disagree with you, Beach, but I don't think there's conclusive evidence to overturn the soft call. Here we go.
Insufficient evidence. So the soft callers are behind.
There's usually instant remonstration, isn't there?
Correct. By the players. He would have got up straight away and was like, "Nah, touched." There was none.
Right. So why I wanted to talk about it is because my point about that, I don't blame that goal umpire one little bit. I don't, people make mistakes. It's a pressurized environment. I don't have, there's no, and no one's criticizing, people criticize the field umpires. No one's criticizing that umpire. They're rightly criticizing the ARC. So as I wrote today, so apologies to anyone who's read this on Demonland today, but I've calmed down now, although that's fired me back up again. That error cost us 4 points. That was a goal. And I don't care what people say. That cost us 4 points. So we won this game of football. Right? So that cost us 4 points.
It's more than 4 points. It's potentially a home final. It could
all sorts of things. Well, who knows?
Whatever.
Maybe
anyway,
we'll go on to win the flag because of it. Who knows? So, but it cost us 4 points, that error. In a game, we won the expected score. And I've noted this a lot of times. The clubs put a lot of store in expected score. We won on the expected score by 2 points. That cost us a goal, and it's simply not good enough. The AFL have just got to sort this stuff out. And I would say, with not the same level of passion, I have to say, but I would say the same if it was us that benefited from it, not them. But again, I want to be clear, this is 100% on the AFL, not the goal umpire. If they use ARC, they should either invest in the technology and have a proper system that's thought through, or scrap it. The VAR in the World Cup, which I've been watching with, it's been brilliant, the World Cup. The VAR, it works brilliantly. One, because they've invested in the proper technology. But the other thing is it takes, as importantly, and probably more importantly, it takes the pressure off the referee and the linesman, the VAR, because if a difficult and really controversial or potentially controversial decision has to be made, it's made by an anonymous person shielded from the baying fans screaming at them. The fans are only 2 meters behind the poor goal umpire. And the on-field ref doesn't cop abuse or isn't under pressure. And almost, I'd love to know the number on this, but I reckon it'd be a third of the time when there's a call, it reverts to the umpire's call because there's insufficient evidence. And the umpire, and this is a perfect example, has made that call, whether it be touched or whether it's hit the post or whatever the case may be, wherever it's gone over the line. They've made that call in the moment and usually under huge pressure. I mean, the crowd, this was in the last minute of the game with no option to take their time and calmly review the evidence. That's what the video person can do up in a room somewhere in the top of the MCG. They don't want to invest. The AFL doesn't want to invest in the technology to make this work and have a proper procedure and a system in place. Then just scrap it. Make it simple. If the umpire is 100% certain it's touched, it's a point. No worries. If not 100% certain, not if I think it may have been touched, well, it's a goal. Take out the grey, and that's this thing that just drives me nuts. I keep on talking about it. The AFL are deliberately, I think, allowing so much grey in the game. A huge amount of stress would have been avoided, not to mention resources that could be instead poured into improving, as George was saying, the decision-making skills of the umpires. That's what needs to be improved. That's where the money for ARC could go. The ARC was brought in when Hawkins was awarded a goal, and I forget which grand final it was, 2008 maybe? So when 2008, so he was awarded a goal in the grand final when the replays and it was backed up and the naked eye showed it hit the post, and they brought it in to prevent similar howlers. 15 years later, we are still having howlers, but it's worse. It's because everyone is watching it over and over. It's like a howler times 10. It just drives me nuts. It's the law of unintended consequences. And that law, the AFL, and I think deliberately, consistently, repeatedly fail to respect that law, let alone heed. They don't worry about it. They could have saved a fortune, a huge amount of angst. If 15 years ago they simply changed the rule and made it like rugby, soccer, hockey, gridiron, ice hockey, and Gaelic football. If it hits the inside of the post and goes through, it's a goal. Simple. If it hits the post and goes back into the field of play, it's a point. So now we have stupid things like snicko. It's not even available at every ground. Points getting paid when it hits the oversized flapping padding at the minutes wasted trying to zoom in using GoPro substandard tech on the point of impact.
Soviet-era tech, someone on Demonland said.
Only to end up going, after all of that, with whatever the soft call was. And there's no fixed rule on what the soft call should be. It's like they could make it. They could do like they do in cricket, the old thing in cricket, which is, it goes, the batsman gets the benefit, where there's doubt, the benefit of the doubt goes to the batsman. Well, the benefit of the doubt could go to the kicker, and it's a goal every time. And for me, it's just another example of the AFL making things ridiculously and unnecessarily and deliberately, I think, complicated, and creating these grey areas that just create all this controversy and clicks and they dominate the airtime. I'm sure it's all over 360 tonight, and there's videos of it. I mean, it's just nuts. It's just so frustrating. The deliberate made more sense before the rule. We talked about it last week. Bring in rules that get rid of grey areas. Bring in the AFLW rule so you don't have this idea of insufficient intent. The umpiring is hard enough to do. How's the umpire supposed to know whether a player's been thinking about putting it out or not? Take the grey out of the game. It just drives me nuts. And what it's cost us is 4 points. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's not playing for Skittles. It's not some Amateursville. Well, it feels like it's Amateursville. And there's a whole bunch of other examples. They're holding the ball, insufficient attempt, all of not disposing of it. It's a schmozzle. It's getting worse and worse. That was a joke on Saturday night, and it's not the umpire's fault. Again, it's the AFL. There's clearly a directive not to play holding the ball. I went to 𝗙cie on Sunday. They were not paying holding the ball. It's absolutely nuts. And the new one that's coming in is the scrappling and holding and blocking in the marking contest. They're allowing that to go on all day, and then they'll pick out one out of the blue, and all to create controversy. I'm increasingly think they do it deliberately. Because there's things that they can easily do. They could fix up right now, and they're choosing not to. The particularly maddening thing about this is 100% predictable. It happened last year. Richmond, remember the game late in the season with who's their full forward?
Lynch.
It was in the final.
Scenario. Brisbane Lion go through because this happened already, and they don't fix it up. It's just infuriating, and I think the players deserve better, the clubs deserve better, the umpires deserve better. If they're serious about protecting the umpires, they should do something about it. And the fans deserve better. I left that ground just white-hot anger. We're furious. And I'm still pissed off about it, all because, they're rinky-dink, just not investing in this game. It's ridiculous, and it's in their control. They're the stewards of the game, and their whole motivation seems to be to crowd out the airtime and not give soccer any space, not give basketball any space, not give any other sport, rugby, any space in the airtime. It's no way to run a competition.
Yeah, that how many millions or billions of dollars are they going to spend on this new Tasmanian team, and they can't get the goal line technology right? It would be so simple, George.
Yeah, I agree about all the technology component. It's pretty cheap and nasty and antiquated at the very best. I actually think it was touched, but not by the left hand.
The other hand, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at the vision, there was 2 shots from the side, which they finally showed on the arc, but they went back to the front on views and the behind views. The ball clearly went over the top of the left hand. It didn't get touched by the left hand. However, 𝗟𝗟𝗀𝗰𝗀𝗀 and JVR were pushing Marchbank very heavily, and they actually pushed him into the ball. It hit his right wrist, and Chaser J today on Demonland noted that the goal umpire thought that it hit the right wrist. So the touch component was on the way down, but everybody's focused on whether it touched his fingers. It had nothing to do with it. One of the Channel 7 commentators even made straight away the point, it looks like it's hit his leg as well. We don't know because we won't see the vision.
It didn't hit. There's no way he touched that. There's no. We'll have to agree to disagree, George.
Go and have a look at the right hand. The right hand.
Later in that same show, he's interviewed. Marchbank is interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, "Where did you touch it? Did you touch it on your fingers?" And he said, "Yes." The player himself said he touched it on his fingers.
Well, he claimed when he hit the ground, you can see his.
And the commentators saying that nobody remonstrated. He was already on his back remonstrating.
He was remonstrating
straight away. Yeah. So, they need to invest in proper technology, proper speeded cameras to pick up those sort of things. It's ridiculous that we're still going through this. And you're right. And the other thing that they should immediately bring in is, don't ask for the "I think it was touched." Your call is touched. That's it.
Or not make any soft call. Just go up and they make the decision.
And maybe they should bring in the same as what they do in cricket and other things. You've got an appeal. Yeah. You've got 2 chances to appeal, and that would have overturned that ridiculous Cameron goal on the weekend as well. Everybody in the ground knew that was out of bounds, and yet there was no avenue for appealing that.
But the other thing,
let give the captain 2 appeals for the game like they do in cricket or whatever.
An appeal wouldn't have helped us.
Then you go to the arc.
Appeal wouldn't have helped us.
Let's say it was touch, right?
Yeah.
My understanding is, because I haven't watched the replay, is they didn't zoom in. I watched some other game on the weekend, and it was a Riewoldt goal. They spent 90 seconds looking at it on all these different angles. This game is in the balance, and that was not even at the end of the game. The game wasn't in any balance, and they looked like they spent 35 seconds making that decision.
Even zooming in, the technology is so crap. The resolution looks so bad when they zoom it in. They wouldn't have been able to tell anything.
But yeah, I agree. Like, send it up. There's no call. What's they going to say? If you just say, make the person up, and then if they have to go back to the soft call, they say, look, that my decision was a touch, because the arc is going to be thinking his decision or her decision when they're looking at the vision is coloured by what they think the umpires said.
That's right. Yeah. Again, it encourages non-decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was touched. No, your call is touched.
Yeah, I'm not sure as the arc reviewer whether it was touched. I think the umpire was closer. The umpire's looking up. How can they tell?
Yeah.
All right, we've got a caller on the line. Kieran, I believe that's you from Canberra. How are you going, Kieran?
I'm good, mate. How are you going?
A bit flat at the moment, but I'm getting some free therapy at the moment from Bin Man. But he's just made me much more angrier than I was before I came here. So,
mate, I love that passion, Bin Man. Good on you, mate. You made us feel all a lot better. Thank you so much. And particularly,
he's feeling much better.
Hey, this is why we all listen in on a Monday night to make ourselves feel better after a weekend like that. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things there. One, you were both right, because Marchbank was interviewed after the game on ABC, and he said he touched his fingers. After a pause, they asked him, "Where did it touch?" He goes, "My fingers." But the goal umpire said he heard a clip of the ball, and that was ultimately the decision of why he went with, I thought it was touched. They had as you said, Ben, you mustn't have been able to see 360. They talked a little bit about it there, but I think you're right, George. I think it was probably touched in some scenario, but interestingly, Marchbank didn't know whether he touched his fingers or his arm, so that puts it back up for speculation in my book anyway. So.
Fact of the matter is we're not going to get the 4 points after the fact, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, that's right. My question tonight is and look, you may have already touched on it or you're going to, is what I call the Brodie conundrum. What do we do? What do you think we'll do? Will we have any say in it, or will Brodie, being the alpha ruckman, request to go? My sense is that he probably will now, because it's Tom's probably next in line. I'm just interested in what you guys think about this scenario.
Well, we're coming up, and I won't bring it forward. We've got a heap of questions and things people have asked about the Gawn and Grundy, and I guess it's all linked to our forward line as well. So we are going to talk about that shortly.
Excellent.
In terms of whether he's going to go at the end of the year, I think we've just got to wait to see how this year plays out. I would assume he's going to still play. I don't know if they're going to drop in this week. We'll talk more about that a bit later. But yeah, there's still a bit of footy to play out, and I don't know. Who knows?
No, you're right. It is weak, as I should know. I've listened to this show now for not many years. I should know that we should wait to see before we ask those silly questions.
No, that's okay. I'm adding your question to the 10 we've got about Grundy coming up. So stay tuned for that one.
And I look forward to hearing what, at some point, again, this will be much later, what you guys think we'll do with our draft capital, because we've got such a great selection this year, and I'll be interested to see where they go with that. And a lot of that, I guess, decisions will be made by what happens with the remaining parts of the year. But keep doing what you're doing, guys. Thanks, you. And
mates.
Thanks for making us all feel better, Ben Man and George and Andy.
Pleasure.
See you guys.
Thanks, Kieran. Appreciate it. In terms of our draft, we'll get into that. We've got a lot of water to go under the bridge until we start talking about. Remember back in the day when all we would talk about all year was our draft?
Well and truly, we'll have started talking draft.
Now I don't want to know about that until sometime in October. All right, let's get on. We're talking flag favourites here, and 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁 asks, would be interested to know if Big Man still thinks we are favourites for the flag. I thought we were beaten by a team that was a lot hungrier than we were tonight, with 3/4 of their starting midfield out. Supreme Demon asks, are the Demons pretenders or contenders for this year's AFL Premiership? I'm sure the media experts will be asking the same question about us this week. Growl says, with the caveat that this is mildly tongue-in-cheek and obviously exaggerated, would Bidman please explain himself? I took my seat in the top deck of the G amidst a throng of similarly bearded amateur tacticians, expecting to observe an outfit at the peak of conditioning, whizzing about the turf in uncatchable arcs, but they didn't turn up. In their place, I witnessed the stodgy second-to-it, fumblomatic, lead-foot brigade of the mid-season, pre-season struggle to propel the ball over the goal line from 40. Slip and slide conditions acknowledged. Where was the energy? Sam6172 says, I thought we actually played very well for large periods of the game. Our defence held up to that first quarter onslaught brilliantly. As much as it sucks, we were very narrowly beaten by the informed team of the comp at the moment and had plenty of chances to put it away. Golordi says, here's a big picture question for the panel. Has our premiership window shut already? We ripped it up in 2018 but got embarrassed in the preliminary final. Then we wasted 2 years until finally snatching the prize in 2021. Should we have had 3 by then? I'm still confident about this year. I don't think Carlton's form can last, but we are not clearly superior like we were in the first half of 2022 before the troops started reporting to the infirmary. Now, B-Man, these questions are primarily for you, so take it away.
So I think I've covered off Growl's question in terms of, my sense of how much better we played than what some people think. But the punting question, it's really a good question. It's a really interesting one, and I'm not promoting punting here, so just leaving that to one side is I've been a lifelong punter primarily on horses, and one of the things that I really love about punting, and it's really informed my analysis of all sorts of things, but in particular sport or manner of sport, is looking at it objectively, which is why I push back a little bit on this notion that I'm overly optimistic or unrealistic. I actually don't think I am. So the answer to that question is I actually do think we're premiership favourites, and the way I assess it. So this is the sorts of things that I look at in terms of working out an analysis of the odds. So currently on current price, the Pies are $3.50, Port are $5 to win the flag. We're $6 to win the flag. We're I've got to check that, $5.56. Pies are favourite at $3.50, so we're $5. And I would have us as the favourite. I would have us at 4s, implied probability of 25%, and I would have the Pies and Lions second favourite at $5.50 and Port at 7, and I would have the Blues out at 8. Now, the reason I've arrived at that is the things that I factor into my analysis for who's going to win the flag is the form in the last 10 games. On the form ladder in the last 10 games, the Blues are on top 8-2. We're second, 7-3, with the second best percentage in that period, just behind Port. Lions are third, 7-3. The Giants are fourth on 7-3 as well. The Pies are fifth on 7-3. Port are way down in ninth on 6-4 in the last 10 games. For me, the biggest factors in terms of teams are fitness, the injuries, the system. Defence wins grand final, so defensive system in particular, but by system I also mean the way the ball's transitioned and method. Experience counts for a lot for me, so I put weight on that. List strength, which is subjective, obviously, but I have to land on that somewhere, and that's how I arrive at where I think in terms of assessing our chances. So I think we are the favourites, the genuine favourites, and not because I'm optimistic. The Pies have Dacos, Moore and Sidebottoms out of their best 22 at the moment. Sidebottom's got a big question mark on him. I'm not quite clear on what his injury is. Port have got Dixon, Georgiades and Cleary out of their best 22. The Lions have got Ashcroft and Gunston got injured for 3-4 weeks, maybe longer. Both big outs, but particularly Ashcroft. The D's, we've got Fritter and Petty out of their best 22 and both Brown and T-Mac. The Blues, who this is amazing given their performance on the weekend, they've got Chera, Silvani, Williams, McGovern, Kennedy, McKay and Walsh, who might be back this week out of their best 22. So it's amazing how well they're going with those players out. All credit to them. I think the fitness is massive. I've been talking about this all season. I think it is the biggest factor in football outside injury and list now. I would, rating out of 10, just as trying to find some measure, I would have us as the fittest side, as defined by the way we're running out games. Since the Saints game, we have run out every single game super well. That's not true of Lions. They haven't. They've been really running out of gas in the last quarter, and happened again in this game against the Crows. It happened against us. Port, similarly, they have had a really tough stretch of games, 5-6 super physical games. They were back to somewhere near their best and running over the ground against GWS, but really slowed down in the last quarter. The Pies are running to, they're almost out of gas. So unless something magic happens with them, I think they're in trouble. So I would have them at us at 10 for fitness, the Pies at 7, Port at 8, the Lions at 9. They look better, and probably the Blues at 9 as well. They look really fit. System, I think the system is the D system. That's why the Blues have copied us, GWS have copied us. So I think the method that Pies got is really suspect for finals. Their defensive vulnerability is a massive vulnerability. I think Port defensively are weak too. The Lions have really improved their defense. So I think we've got the best system. Defense wins grand finals. That is such a truism. It wins finals. The average losing score this season, and thanks to Demonland poster for these numbers, in their losses this year, the Pies averaged getting beaten by 21.5 points. Port are getting beaten by 35.5 in their losses. The Lions are 25.3. Blues are a bit of an asterisk on this one. They're 26.5, but they lost 7 in a row, and they've improved. Their defense has improved out of this world in the last little bit. So, but still, we're only averaging 10 points for our 7 losses. That's just amazing. That's incredible. So I put a big store in that. That just shows how strong our defense is. Defense wins flags. Experience counts for a lot. So, each of these factors factor in. We're the most experienced side. We've played in a grand final. The other teams haven't. The Pies have only played in the one final series. I would say Port are the second most, in the Lions, both of them, but haven't got through to a flag. And the Blues, of course, haven't got any experience in finals whatsoever. List strength is, that's subjective, obviously, but I think we've got the strongest list with the Lions second. So all in all, the answer for that, putting those data together, I would have the thing about the Blues, a lot of people have them, as some chance, but statistically only the top 4 teams have a realistic chance of winning the flag. In the last 25 years, only 2 teams have won a flag from outside the top 4, the Dogs in 2016, and that has also got an asterisk on it because that was the first year of the pre-final bye, and the Crows in 1998. So they're currently $6 to win the flag. The Blues, I'd have them probably 8 or 9, just because it's so hard to win a flag from outside the top 4. I would have us as favourite. I would have the Lions as second favourite, equal with the Pies, and Port. I think aren't that strong, and I have them at 7 to 1 and third favourite. So hopefully that answers Pew's question.
Okay, so I guess you do think we're still favourites, George.
I was just going to add, in response to one of the questions about whether we were still in our premiership window, I looked at Richmond's history from 2013 to this year. They were in contention for 5 years before they won a premiership, got themselves in there. So, and then they won 3. Having done that, they won 3 out of the next 4. So. Effectively, they played 8 out of 10 years. They were in the finals, and only really had two bad years from injury. In 2016, I think they finished 13th at the end of the home and away. But you're not out of the premiership window suddenly overnight. And it was a real comparison with us when they were talking about, we were trying to do something in 2018. Well, that's only 5 years ago. So if Richmond are the benchmark, then we've still got quite a few years in us to be challenging, and I think that'll be the case.
That's such a good point, George. And again, that's what I mean by looking. That's the thing I apply from a punting lens, because you bring all this information in punting and you try to take the emotion out of it. When I'm betting on horses, I'm trying to do it without any emotion. I don't have favourite horses, and the thing about a loss like we had on the weekend, that doesn't knock my confidence. If a horse gets beaten by a head and gets rolled, I'm not going to jump off him the next time. It's the same in this. But your point about that sustained success is so important. Geelong won their flag last year. What was it? 10 years from their previous?
10 years, yeah.
They barely dropped out of the top 4 in that intervening years. So that's what Goody has been talking about for a long time. It's not about winning one flag; it's about winning multiple flags. And the only way to do that is to be inside in the premiership window for a decade, for instance. And we're maybe halfway through a decade of, even if we go back to 2017. So I legitimately think we're the favourite to win the flag. My one concern is if we have to play the Lions at the Gabba. And I really rate the Lions, and I think they've got a game. They've designed their game to beat us. I'm not concerned about Port. I'm not concerned about Pies. The Pies vulnerabilities that I've been talking about all season are coming patent and clear to anyone who can see now. And Port have got the same. They get opened up on defence all the time. Lions don't, but Ashcroft is a massive out for them. And 𝗟𝗏 is a huge out for the Pies, obviously.
When would you prefer to play Brisbane at the Gabba? First final or preliminary final?
Well, hopefully we can avoid. But if we have to go to Adelaide, for instance, to play Port Adelaide, that's a home away from home. We'll beat Port Adelaide at Port Adelaide. Brisbane have got they have won, I forget the numbers, but it's something like 98% of their games they've played up there in the last 10 years they've won, or some crazy number like that. So you can't ignore a data point like that. That would be the big run. I would drop us down to 6 or 7 to 1, for instance, if we ended up having to go via Brisbane up at the Gabba. We beat them in round 23 last year, so we can do it. But that would be a major. But Adelaide's different. Adelaide suits us perfectly, and Port, I just think they're defensively. They've got a very strong list, Port, but they're defensively extremely vulnerable. And as I keep saying, as George has talked about as well, defence wins finals, and we have got the best defence. The Blues were impressive on the weekend, but they're outside the top 4. We have got the best defence in the AFL. We'll win the flag this year.
The other problem with Brisbane is that I suspect it'll finish as a final. It'll probably finish up being a night game, and we know how slippery that is. And We'll talk about us playing in the wet shortly.
Well, very shortly. In fact, right now, Scroll asks, what is it with the D's and wet weather footy? We've lost 5 out of 5 this season on a wet, slippery deck. Lazy adds, there are times when we can't play open and fast all the time, especially in weather like this. We need to know that we have the ability to bang it in and lock it in when we need to. This one felt a bit like the final against the Swans. Bomb in, hit ground, opposition take away. Travie14 says, another thing I noticed from the game is the fact that we refused to kick the ball off the ground and clear the area. Very frustrating. A few times our player was just first to the ball and had 2 opponents around them, and rather than kick it forward and hopefully get a number to the contest, we try and pick it up and handball out, then inevitably turned it over, and then our numbers at the contest is lost. I noted this countless times. It looked as if it was an instruction, which baffles me, especially in wet weather. So George, the wet weather gods certainly aren't smiling upon the Demons. We can't seem to play in the wet. Can you assure me that September will be as dry as a dead dingo's
Hopefully El Nino arrives early this year and we won't have that problem. So, but yeah, the fact that we've had those 5 games that we've lost have all had some weather component in it is starting to point towards a trend. The one thing about, I don't think we've certainly in a couple of games we adapted very well to what were very obviously wet conditions. The old adage about just kick the ball forward, it has to be about territory. No matter how you do it, we don't seem to adopt that early enough compared to other sides. The other big downside of wet weather football, we probably saw it in this particular game, is that it restricts the output of your highly talented players. They just don't kick the ball as well as what they should. Perhaps in this game, the prime example would have been Salem, who when he got that ball and he kicked it from 50, which is a fairly long way to kick a goal after the ball's been wet at the end of the game and you're tired. Of all the players in the side, that'd be the one that I would have wanted to be kicking for goal, but he just didn't have anything left. So it exposes the players who aren't good disposers of the ball, but it also limits the outputs of our more highly talented players. And we really depend on our highly talented players to move the ball. You know, the Petrarcas, in particular. But the whole team's around that process of gaining territory, move the ball quickly. If there's a fumble or it slips, it really upsets the whole system. So we do get exposed by the wet more. And the old adage about wet weather football brings the good teams down. That's exactly what we've found in the circumstances.
I agree with my take's always been that it exacerbates our, as you mentioned, our poor disposal skills, which I think is our biggest weakness. Is that we're poor kicking skills. Our best players are not elite kicks. We don't have. Track, I love him, but he's not 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀 in terms of his kicking, is he? And same with Oliver for that matter. And we fumble, and I think we're not one touch like say Butters and Rosie are, and so we don't have those players. I forget who it was. It was one of their older players, Blues. What's the number 39? He picked up a ball off the like a half volley when we hadn't been able to pick up any. It was just such a brilliant bit of play deep in defence. It was like right on the goal line. It was a magnificent bit of footy. And it just really stuck out because we had barely done any of them during the match. So it feels like the wet weather, that's been my sense anyway, that's the main thing. But and I think Andy's right, there's a real sense, or perhaps you said it, George, is a question about whether we adjust our game plan at all to play wet weather footy, or whether we just stick to our system so much and don't do that. But interestingly, I watched First Crack last night, and 2 things were interesting because David King, Hutto first mentioned our record in the wet, and then the very next segment afterwards, and David King didn't connect these 2, but was David King talking about, didn't respond to, it wasn't making a connection between the wet weather footy, but he asked whether it's max or bust. And I feel a bit sorry for David King because he's finally jumped on the Melbourne bandwagon only for for the D's to lose. It's a really interesting question that he raised. So all credit to him. But what's interesting is he didn't look to correlate between the wet weather. So what he said was, his question was basically, can we win without Max Gawn? And his point was, when Max has a ranking point, so his ranking points for a particular game, it's 13.7 ranking points or more, we are 8 wins and 1 loss. When Max has 5 or more score involvements, we are 11 zip, which is amazing, really, isn't it? So less than 5 in score involvements, we're 1-6. So we've only won 1 and lost 6, but we're 11 zip when he has 5 or more score involvements, which is pretty compelling argument. So it's a reasonable question. David King asked about, about really how much we rely on Maxi, and it definitely speaks to how important Max is to us, and there's no question about that. But because the way that they structured that, with Hutto talking about our wet weather football and then going to another conversation, which, as I said, they didn't correlate, it got me thinking about the correlations to our record in the wet and whether there's something else that I was missing in terms of our disposal skills and that stuff. So I wondered whether, if we looked at Maxi's game, perhaps he just doesn't play well in the wet, and so it correlates to the wet. So his lowest score involvement was in the first Lions game, so we'll take that out because he was injured early in the game, so I won't count that game. His season high for score involvements was he had 10 score involvements in our Tigers win in round 20, and he has 4 games this season with 7 score involvements, 3 with 5 score involvements, and 3 games with 3. And for context around his player rating, his average player rating is 12.7, and his highest so far is 32 in the round 18 against Brisbane. So what I looked at is whether in those wet games, so the wet games were Port, Blues, Cats and Giants, is that right?
Yep. Essendon as well, wasn't it?
Max
didn't play in that one, so I didn't count
okay.
Essendon. So he didn't play in that one. So that left the Port game, Blues game, Cats game, GWS. In the Port game, his ranking was 5.2. Not counting the Lions game because he was out. That's the lowest ranking for the entire season. So wet weather, tick. His equal second lowest score involvements. He only had 2 that day. So tick. Blues game, his ranking was only 9.1. This is the game just gone. That was the 4th lowest ranking game of his season this year. So he did not have an impact the way that he would have liked. He only had 1 score involvement in this game just gone. That's the lowest for the entire season. In the Cats game, which was also wet, he had the 7th low of the season, and his ranking was 12.6, so 7th again. Score involvements, he only had 3 that day, so equal 3rd lowest. And in the GWS game, he had not a bad game. 16.6 was his ranking. Remember, his high was 30, but it was 13th lowest of the season, but he only had 2 scoring involvements. So the conclusion I come from that was, I agree with King. It's not quite Max or bust, but certainly an up and about Maxi who rates highly in the games and has lots of score involvements, correlates with wins, but also high scoring, because in those games where he had the 7s and the 10, we scored really highly. But what King didn't correlate, as I said, was, well, whether that correlates with him playing in the wet, and it does. And it's clear from that data is that Maxi struggles to play his best footy and have score involvements when it's wet, which makes sense given his strength. His one wood is his marking, and he's not marking footy up forward. So the answer about us struggling in the wet, I think a big part of the answer is because Maxi struggles.
So the solution is to get the hoses out at training, get some soapy.
The solution is just don't rain in September.
Well,
Yeah.
But it does. I think David King makes a good point, to be honest, is our reliance on Maxi to be playing his very best footy for us to be playing our very best footy.
I don't know if this is my MFCSS talking and I haven't done any calculations. I haven't looked at what the weather was in certain matches. I bet you we've played the most wet weather games this year.
AFL again.
Damn AFL and the Bureau of Meteorology
Don't forget the
against
umpires.
us.
Yeah,
and
we
the
put a roof
umpires.
over the stadium.
Yeah, well, let's go to Marvel. Let's talk about pressure, which you've already talked about. Track Forever says, "Hi guys, love your work. Question for the group. Carlton's pressure was over 200 for the whole night, and good on them for being able to sustain it for that long. But that rarely happens for a quarter or two, let alone a game. We stood up to their pressure and could have pinched the game in the dying minutes. What is your view on how we withstood their pressure, and were you impressed at how we not only held them at bay, but then were able to turn the momentum around to our way?" BW511 says, "If that's the model of finals footy, which I think it was, then there's a fair few things we can't quite do well enough just yet. We were led to the ball all over the ground. We reverted back to the bees to the honeypot method around the footy. We can't kick to advantage consistently. We lacked leg speed, and despite some questionable treatment, Max was worked over and dropped his head. We can fine-tune the above and are definitely in the mix, but Carlton are now a serious threat and have a game plan that stifles us." Buck Naked says, "Pressure and structure wins finals. It has been our one wood now for the past few years, with the sugar rush of the Pies approach built to counter it. Now we faced a team that outdemoned the Demons. Their setup defensively was brilliant, and their whole ground pressure was unbelievable. And we lost by a fingernail, real or imagined." Supreme Demon adds, "After losing a close game to Carlton in a finals-like atmosphere with a big crowd at the MCG, what do the Demons players need to do for the next time? Do we panic under pressure? Did Michael Voss outcoach Simon Goodwin in the match, mainly in regards to strategy and tactics, or was it just a case of the Blues players winning the crucial contests and applying a high level of pressure?" Roosted Far says, "I thought we had them at the end of the third and was disappointed with the 2 goals at the start of the last." From Go to Woden says, "Long-time listener, first-time caller, looking forward to the pod as I chew my nails with the finals fast approaching. Was it just me, or did we seem to panic in the last few minutes against the Blues? It seemed rushed and there didn't seem to be a set play or plays to get a decent shot at goal." Bobo says, "Seemed like the Blues were forcing our long kicks by pressuring the ball handler and being ready to intercept handballs or immediately pressure our handball recipients." And now I've got a voice message from Salty.
Personally, I'm not as saddened by a loss as I would normally be. Thought that we really handled their pressure quite well in the first quarter. What frustrated me the most in the first quarter was mainly that we just used the ball so poorly by foot and just let the pressure come at us a lot, because we just sort of butchered it on the way out and didn't settle the game down and actually dictate the terms of the game, which was a bit disappointing for me. But otherwise, I don't take too much from it, and I still think we're a good chance to go deep in September. All right, have a good one. Thank you.
So, Big Man, you've spoken about the pressure numbers in your stats files. This was finals-like pressure from the Blues for the whole match. Did we buckle under this pressure? You say no, because our pressure was up there as well.
I don't say no. We only lost the game by 4 points.
No, I'm saying we didn't buckle under
pressure. We lose that game by 5 goals.
I know, that's what I'm saying. You said no. So were we outcoached, and is this the blueprint to defeat the D's in September? Pressure, high pressure.
Any team who can play like that, like Carlton did, and sustain that level of pressure has got a chance of beating us. Any team. The fact that they averaged 206 pressure points for that game is amazing, and it's all credit to them. I reckon that I haven't checked, but I would be amazed if that's not their highest for the entire season. So it was an enormously intense performance, as George pointed out. The tackling numbers were off the charts. They were the highest for the season. It was an incredibly intense game. I agree with Salty that, as I mentioned before, the 33 of their first 41 points were from turnover. Now, some of that was our poor skill error, but it was a lot of that was driven by their pressure, and the two come together. If you've got average skills across the side, well, you're going to get opened up. But that's why it was such an impressive fight back from us. I thought where we lost the game, to be honest, is watching it. It really felt like rowing, that thing where we were just slowly getting past them. Is for me personally where we lost it was giving up those first 2 goals in the last quarter. I was so confident. That was partly why I was so gutted when I left, because I was so confident we were going to win that game. Just felt like all the numbers, they roll the stats on the video on the screens at the footy now at the G. And so our time in forward half was coming back to 50-50. Our contested ball, that's why I know the contested ball never dropped below parity, because they kept on rolling that, and I was noting it as the game went on. The turnover scores just completely dried up for them. That's where they got their score advantage from, but we took that away from them. it was all going our way that game until we gave up those 2 goals. And, of course, we gave up the third. But it was the first 2 that really hurt. And 𝗪cie was rucking in both of them, I think, wasn't he, George? First one I could cop.
That's correct, yeah. Until Grundy came into the ruck. We've gone 18 points down, and then they put Grundy in the ruck.
And I thought he did great. He turned it back in our way. And it's so easy to forget because, like, you see it all the time in footies. When a team is coming at another team, if they suddenly, against the grain, a team gets the goals, it can take the wind out of the sails. Most teams would have buckled under the pressure that Carlton applied and continue to apply. They had 202 in the last quarter. We upped our rating. We upped it to our season high 214 for a quarter. That is unbelievable. And the fact that we're able to get that game back on our terms and could have won it if not for some mistakes by maybe the umpires, maybe the goal umpire. Take your point, George, that maybe it was touched. There's still 90 seconds to go, so maybe they would have scored anyway and won the game. Who knows what would have happened after that. I think it's from 𝗟𝗲𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗁. I tend to agree with that comment that the last minute or so that we rushed a little bit. Even Track's shot at goal, like that shot that he took, he could have gone back and couldn't have he made the distance from outside 50? He played on almost immediately and wheeled and went.
Yeah, he could have done the how they run around and not had a guy right next to him as well. He had that pressure from a guy on his right-hand side. And he could have done that without and got into the 50, taking the set shot.
Partly it was a finals-like game. It was intense. It was nuts. Like there was 70,000 people. There was tension because of the soccer. Like there was a funny app. It was a really wide game, but we weren't our calmest in the last. I reckon that's a fair comment. I don't think we were as calm as we were against, say, Brisbane in that last 2 minutes or even Adelaide. Mind you, we still had our chances. 𝗟𝗨 could have kicked that goal. Nibbler almost kicked the brilliant goal from the boundary that hit the post. Definitely could have got that free kick that 100% should have been given to JVR. 𝗟𝗨 could have kept on running. I thought it wasn't the fact that he missed it from 50. At that point, they were starting to flag. You could see it, and space opened up all the time. And I think JJ had I know he was off at that stage. Someone else had, maybe it was Rivers, had space. He could have run a bit further. I thought 𝗟𝗨's one, the main one, is that he could have run another 5-10 metres forward.
Easily, yeah.
He
had players really pointing at him, go, like...
And he was running at me because I was in the top of the Ponsford stand, as I was saying. And, it was I think that's a reasonable criticism. But what has to be remembered, in a low-scoring game, they got 18 points up. We wrested the momentum back. And I think Brodie Grundy hasn't got the credit he deserves for doing that because 𝗪cie didn't have a great game. I didn't mind the first one because we were set up to be aggressive ourselves. We were looking to score, but they should not have allowed that second goal. And for me, that's where we lost it. If we'd only given up one of those 2 goals, I reckon we go on to win the game.
And the worst part about those 2 goals was they came from out the back of the square. That you can understand the bang, bang, bang that we all know about. When it comes out the front, that's a different story. But they're out the back of the square, and they just waltzed around us. It was really, really disappointing watching that happen.
And which one was it? The second one was de Koninck's mark. That was a bad defensive error to leave a lane for him to, I know it's out of the square and it's 6-6, but the defensive coach, they won't have been happy giving up that goal.
Yeah, it should never have come out of the middle in the first place. That was, it's just, you give those, as you said, you give those up. That's the difference at the end of the game.
And credit to Smitty for drilling that goal.
That was a good goal.
That was a solid under pressure goal after a beautiful mark. He outmarked 𝗪cie. Actually took it out of his hands and kicked beautifully.
Well, yeah, we were right behind that, and that absolutely gun barrel straight it was. It was a great kick and a high pressure kick as well, given the circumstances in the game.
And so it was really disappointing to lose. It was, all of the reasons we've talked about, but credit where it's due. They kept going, the D's, and did not. Even when how many teams in past of Demons that we've watched would have dropped their heads after giving those first 2 goals, let alone the third goal to get an 18-point lead. Almost every other Melbourne team, bar this one, would have folded up and gone home, and we would have been talking about a 5-goal loss, not a heartbreaking 4-point loss.
Let's talk slow starts. BW511 asks, how does the group feel about letting teams get out to a lead most weeks? Understand it's impossible to control all facets of games from week to week. However, we are sure making hard work of things by having to overcome deficits so often. 𝗦𝗏𝗀𝗀 asks, why are we so flat to start games at the moment? It wasn't a problem earlier in the year, but it's clearly one currently. So slow starts have been an issue these past couple of weeks. Yet we have seen these blistering starts reeled back in too. So you're going to get momentum swings in games, but the past few weeks have been a worry, and this week in particular could have been even worse at Carlton kicked straight in the first quarter. I believe they missed a few set shots at goal. And we were spanked in the inside 50 count early on. George, are these slow starts a concern for you?
Not only for me, in Goody's presser, it was the first point that he made, that he noted the pretty average start, I think he said, in both in the first quarter and in the first part of the last quarter. The reason for that, I've got no idea. That's what we have coaches for, and all the psychologists trying to work on the players. Momentum swings, as has been noted many, many times, are critical in games, and they will occur. They usually are either started by some fantastic individual effort to create something out of nothing, like 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁 did in this particular game in that final quarter. He had no right to get that goal at all. And all of a sudden, we're back in the game in a big, big way. And that's when the momentum swings. Somebody makes a complete stuff-up of a circumstance, a certain goal or something along those lines. It just deflates everybody, and the momentum swings the other way. So I don't know about the slow starts. I'm not an AFL coach and have never been in that situation. But it's important that you have the leadership on the ground to alleviate those momentum swings, or to initiate those momentum swings. And the good thing, like Binman has just noticed, was we were 18 points down almost halfway through that last quarter, and we ground it back. That's the sort of thing that builds confidence in the players. They know that you're playing a side, 3 goals down halfway through the quarter, and you still come back, and you could have snatched victory in this game. In subsequent games, we already know that we will be capable of doing that. You don't drop your head; you just keep on going, and the results. We've seen Melbourne teams over many, many years. I haven't seen too many Melbourne teams that are that confident about always being in the game as the current teams that we've got.
And that's evidenced by what I was saying. Our average losing margin is 10 points. That is really low. Like at this point in the season, and that includes the 24-point loss or whatever it was to the Bombers. You take that out, it's like 6 points or something.
Can we just please have like a nice, easy win? Just so
no, won't happen.
We had one last week.
Yeah, it won't happen.
And even that one, I was, for the half the game, I had a stress headache that we were going to lose.
It is a issue. I don't know. It's a major issue though. It's not been a theme all year, and I think it's worth noting in this quarter is how you're defining a poor start. Like I think people are overemphasizing that sort of anomalous inside 50 differential, because they only scored 3 more points than us.
Yeah, but they had a few set shots at goal that they missed a bit, man. And if they had kicked straight on, I know they did it.
As I said, they were +4 for expected score at the end of the first quarter.
Well, okay.
So they didn't miss many that they should have got. They weren't allowed shots on goal because of how brilliant our defence was.
All right, let's move on. 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝘀𝗁. So Smurf says, loving the podcast, guys. My Tuesday morning community's made much easier each week, so kudos to you. Thoughts on 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀's return game tonight? I thought he was a little rusty early, as was to be expected, and the slippery conditions didn't help, but he ramped up later in the match. Supreme Demon says it was great to get Clayton Oliver back. However, is our midfield too slow, or is it more to do with the issue of synergy between our players? Sam6172 says, I think Oliver will be better for the run. So after a slow start, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, because I think he had only had 8 possessions to half time or thereabouts. But
that's correct.
Yeah. Then after that, he amassed for the game 27 possessions, 14 contested, 13 tackles. So you talked earlier, Big Man, about his pressure rating, and those 13 tackles go a long way to that. 4 inside 50s, 2 score involvements, and 429 metres gained. So it's not his best stats ever, but welcome back after 10 weeks on the sideline. So that's pretty good. I can only imagine he's better off for the run. As Sam 61772 said. So, Big Man, how'd you rate Clary's performance this week after his long hiatus?
If I had a clip, I should have set this up before, Andy, but I'd answer it with Goody's answer in the presser. He sort of gives his little Goody smile in that question, and basically said, paraphrasing is, how many players come back and play that sort of game with those sort of numbers you just read out? Like how high is the bar that we're putting for this fella? He did look rusty in the sense he didn't accumulate as many possessions as he otherwise normally would, but 400 plus metres gained in a game like that is incredible, given probably most of that, probably 250 of that was in the second half. I thought he was brilliant. I didn't appreciate how much pressure he applied. But as the other thing that Goody said in the presser that I think is really worth noting is that it was an unusual game. You won't get many games of footy where it's two such similar game styles that are all about territory, all about pressure, all about the contest. It was a tough game of footy to assess anyone's performance in it, I think. And again, I'll make the point that it was raining right through that game. It may not have looked like on telly, but there was that funky, misty rain. And so all in all, I would, he would probably only give himself a 4 out of 10, knowing Clary's such a competitive athlete. But it was really brilliant given his 2.5 months out of the game. And I wrote on Demonland during the week that I pinch myself and catch myself forgetting, that I should just be enjoying sometimes, that we get to watch players of the ilk of Oliver and Track and Viney and Max and Gus, who's gone up to another level. Gus has just been phenomenal in the last 6 weeks. I think he's playing his best footy since he's been at the club. So I thought he had a great game. I'm really looking forward to him out on hopefully the MCG with good conditions and, running on top of the ground and maybe not such a brutal game of footy.
Well, I've had a look at the weather on Saturday and Sunday, and it's fine. It doesn't, no precipitation as yet, but that could change. Yes, George.
I think a bit of credit needs to go to the the conditioning people as well. He's been out for 10 weeks and he comes in and plays a game like that.
Runs it out.
And runs it out, yep, exactly. And all these stories about people need to come back through the VFL, well, that was in the past. This is all about getting people up to the right levels to be able to play at the AFL level. And he came back and, fitted in absolutely brilliantly and performed absolutely brilliantly as well. So bit of credit to them.
Well, I think I'd have to check this again, but I think we started the last quarter with, and this was one of the questions that was asked, how would the synergy go? So it's impossible to answer that really, isn't it? I don't know. But I think it was Viney, Track, Oliver and Maxi in that.
That's correct, yep.
Right, yep. First 2 centre bounces and they waltz it out of there. So maybe there's a bit of ring rust in terms of how they work together. And as I said, I reckon that was probably the game. The other thing was the inside 50 tackles. That was the other area that I forgot to mention in terms of their definite advantage over us.
Well, there was that stat that I read, this was prior to this game, about our time without Clayton Oliver versus the time with him. And our stats. So our clearances are well down with Clary in that mix, as opposed to like we were, and there were a few other stats, but clearances were one of them. So, you've spoken before about how it's not all about clearances, but was down. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the midfield mix now. Prestige D says, my question for you boys is about the makeup of our midfield. Obviously, the theme of the year has been about our forward structures, and rightly so, but in regards to the midfield mix now that we have Oliver back, I think that also needs to be looked at. There seems to be a narrative that JJ is about to lose his spot, but that leaves a midfield of Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, Brayshaw and Sparrow. For mine, JJ is a good point of difference and shows poise, class and generally makes good decisions. Also, he had some games with high tackle numbers back in 2021, so if we can rediscover that part of his game, I think I'm happy to have him in ahead of Sparrow for now and we don't lose much. Also concerned that Goodwin seemed to abandon the 𝗍𝗲 in the middle experiment on the weekend as well, which was a great way to get him involved in the game. Would love to get some discussion on this. Jabroni counters his point on JJ, saying Jordan was disappointing again. Could Rivers replace him in the midfield? So, George, what should the midfield mix look like now that Clary is back? Could JJ lose his place? And if so, would we replace him with another mid or use that spot for another forward or perhaps another defender? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a bit difficult. I'll go to the 𝗍𝗲 point for a start. 𝗍𝗲's only ever been used as that shock troop for the very first. He does one or two of the first bounces in the middle, and that's it. You can't expect. Short of cloning him in some way, you can't expect him to play midfield and forward. He's so valuable up forward to us. So, so the experiment is not an experiment. It's a process that you follow. It's the same as what Hawthorn was doing with Cyril Rioli years and years ago. You bring him in for a very short burst and then you move him down the forward line where they do more damage, and that's the way 𝗍𝗲's being played. JJ is a difficult one to answer. He really dropped off in this game. Was disappointing, and the old adage about the finals are coming up, son. There's a spot there for you if you want it, and he doesn't seem to have taken it as we expected. Oliver's now back in the middle. I don't think we'll see any change. I don't think we'll move Brayshaw. Brayshaw's just been too brilliant in the middle, particularly over the last 6 weeks. As we spoke about last week, it enables us to move Petrarca into the forward line to cover the shortages up there that we've experienced over the last couple of weeks. So I don't think we'll see any dramatic change in the midfield from those players. I think you'll see for JJ. I think you might see him move back to the sub this week, but I'm not sure he mightn't go further than that. It's a bit hard to say. It depends. I didn't see anything at Casey that would warrant bringing other people in much at this point in the season, but we'll talk about that a bit later on as well. So I don't think we'll see any real changes to the structure. It's a pretty damn good structure when you've got a 𝗍𝗲 and a Petrarca and an Oliver to choose, and then a backup of Sparrow. I think that's a pretty good place to be at the moment.
I have the Oliver with and without Oliver. So the first possession differential, with Oliver we were 11th and without we were first. Points from centre bounce clearance differential, we were third with him, first without. Clearance differential, with him we were 14th and without we were fourth. And points from stoppage differential, we were 7th and then we were second without him. So the stats don't lie, but who's going to say that we're better off without Clary?
Yeah, I mean that's that thing. That's the David King effect. Is looking at one data point and saying that
Well, that was 4 data points.
No, but it's all hinging on Oliver. There could be any other number of reasons.
Well, Brayshaw came into the mix.
Exactly. Exactly. So
Sparrow had more time.
On JJ is that I'm increasingly thinking, and it's an issue really. I'm in the back of my mind, to be honest, with Brody, is like pace has become so important in footy, and I just worry with JJ. He hasn't quite got that acceleration, just important acceleration in the first 2 or 3 steps to get away from traffic. I mean, I really rate him. I always have really good footy IQ, but I actually think he will come out, and I think he'll get dropped, and I think Spargo will come in.
Well, that's
so we'll drop a midfield out of the rotation and bring a high half forward is my tip.
Well, we've got questions on that later, so we'll go now on the there's no point burying the lead here. We had a lot of questions, queries, comments about the Gawn-Grundy experiment, and it's inextricably tied to our forward line woes, particularly now that Petty is injured and the cavalry from Casey isn't exactly galloping to the rescue. Jabroni says, the Gawn-Grundy combination really struggled tonight. Would appreciate the panel's observations on this. Nat from Instagram says, hi guys, massive fan of the podcast here. Thank you for brightening my week and helping me recover from a stressful weekend when required. No doubt it will come up anyway, but I'd love to hear your thoughts tonight on Brodie Grundy. The internet seems very quick to dismiss him after his efforts on Saturday, but I thought I saw him do some pretty useful things, and on balance, I don't think it was a bad outing for him. Have I just been blinded by my desperate desire for Grundy to be a success? Monocular says, thanks again for all your hard work and patience with some of us posters. What do you all think about the Grundy experiment? That's his spelling, not mine. Can it be made to work? Grundy seems to offer very little other than as a tap ruckman, certainly not a forward. And can we afford to just rotate him off the bench? I guess when playing a team with 2 decent rucks, maybe, but not so sure otherwise. You will have had an opportunity to see T-Mac by the time of the podcast. Interested in your thoughts of his degree of readiness, if he can get fit enough to run and mark Bustle. He could be the key to replacing Petty. I have no idea. Who else? Not Grundy. Supreme Demon says, in my opinion, the Brodie Grundy as a forward experiment doesn't seem to be working. What should we do? Time to bring back Tom McDonald. We desperately need a functioning forward line. Dravy14 says, I think people need to stop calling this Gawn/Grundy an experiment, as it wasn't this. This was a Grundy forward and Gawn in the middle experiment, very different to what originally planned. The forward line is clearly where our downfall is. Seeing our tools in reserve aren't up to it. Our forward line might look something like Pickett, 𝗟𝗯𝗟𝗏, A and B, Fritsch, Chandler. I'm not sure of a better option. Grundy can't survive as a full forward. Sam6172 says, I actually think Grundy performed well in the ruck, but as a forward target, I don't think it's there, and to keep pushing it will be to our detriment. Titus Totty says, Grundy wasn't bad as a ruckman, helped get us back in it. We should play him the rest of the home and away to give Gawn a rest in matches, then we can dispense him back to Casey. Demon Cat says, thanks for all your hard work on the podcast, fellas. A question on our forward line. With all our tall forward options being limited, do you think that a shorter forward line of JVR, Fritter, Melksham, Track, 𝗍𝗲 and Chandler, with Nibbler and Spargo as those high half forwards that Big Man has discussed, would work come finals? Or is maintaining our 2 tall structure more important, even if it means playing a not quite right T-Mac or Ben Brown? No disrespect to either, as they are both champions of our club whose bodies have unfortunately let them down this year. And where does a Grundy fit into either setup, if at all? Thanks, fellas, and looking forward to tuning in. El Diablo 14 says, Grundy would be out if we have one of Ben Brown or T-Mac in, and JVR would be the relief ruck for Max. From Go to Woden says, can we get Grundy to work as it hasn't seemed to, other than to split the workload? It certainly hasn't delivered goals as yet. Other teams seem to make it happen with lesser rucks, but we seem to be adding 2 All-Australian rucks together and getting the output of 1. D. Old Fart says, as we approach September, the Demonland pod takes on even more significance to adoring Demon fans. Keep up the great work. My question, which is probably already covered above, in my opinion, finding our optimal forward line mix will be a key to how far we can progress in September. What does this mix look like given current form and player availability? And finally, there's a lot of questions about this. This is what everyone wants to know about. Doug Remus says, I think we'll all get a look at Grundy again this week. If they expect Fritsch to be back for round 24, makes it a pretty easy decision if it fails again. I think the way forward into finals is this. Oliver returns to the middle. Petrarca starts forward and plays predominantly as a forward unless the panic button is hit. And if Fritsch comes back, he takes Grundy's spot and Smith stays in. Track, JVR, Chandler on the half forward line. Pickett, Smith/Grundy/Fritsch, and Melk in the forward pocket. Thoughts? So, boys, a massive amount to unpack. But when it comes to our forever changing forward line mix, it's impossible to talk about Gawn-Grundy combination. No one wants experiment without discussing the forward line as well. So George, and then Ben Man, what are your thoughts on Grundy's role in the last few matches and into finals, particularly if Fritsch is back on deck by round 24 or in the first week of finals?
For all our people who've contributed into that question, I agree with all of the above. It's just difficult. I can imagine the coaches are going through exactly the same questions at the moment. Grundy, I think, actually rucked better than Max on the weekend. People seem to forget that, particularly in that last quarter. He was instrumental in bringing us back into that. Max was well down. the conditions didn't suit either of them. As Goody said in his presser, it wasn't a great night for forwards. It was wet.
It was crowded too.
It was crowded. Yeah. The fact that both of them could only get 3 marks for the whole game shows how almost ineffective the aerial power that we depend on from the big men. The point of having talls in there is to get the aerial power.
While I think of it, George, is a good. I think that's the point about it impacting in our wet weather, because it takes away that strength, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. Yeah. I think we do need the 2 talls. You can't expect a 20-year-old Jacob van Rooyen to take the for the whole game. The best defenders, and you'd probably finish up with 2 of them in the finals. So you've got to have a second big tall in there in some way, shape or form. And our problem, of course, over the last couple of weeks in particular, is we haven't had any other options. Grundy's now back as the only option. The other thing that Grundy provides in a forward line is the rotation, that in order to give JVR a breakout or Max a breakout, somebody's got to replace them at some point in the game. So you're going to see them sitting in there at some point in the game. It will be really, really interesting to see T-Mac is up and running. I don't think he's running particularly well from what I saw at 𝗙cie, but for the selection committee, it's going to be really difficult. Are we going to get more out of T-Mac in playing a forward, or are we going to get more out of Grundy playing a forward? Because at the moment we don't have any other options. 𝗟𝗍's a complete bust from the looks of things. Ben Brown's not on the field even at the moment. We don't have any other options. I don't think you can go into finals with a single tall and a small forward line. It just won't work. Like I said, you'll kill the 20-year-old Jacob van Rooyen future prospects if you suddenly throw him up against the best defenders in the league. So it's a really difficult thing. I can only guess what's going to go on for this week in particular. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to have to make some serious assessments about, like I said, the value of one versus the other, but we certainly need a tall in there of some sort to be able to provide the rotations and the rest for both Van Rooyen and for Max as well around the ground. At the moment, Grundy is the only option that we've got. I don't think either Max or Grundy are great forwards by any stretch of the imagination. I've always said when we do have another tall forward, be it a T-Mac or a Ben Brown in there as well as Jacob, keep those 2 ruckmen out of there. They just get in the road. They don't provide forward results in terms of goals. So just let the forwards do their work. But at the moment, our hands are tied. We've got no other options.
It's I was. Obviously, as you know, I was dead certain that Grundy would come back in and he'd be the tall, not necessarily forward, exactly as you said. My thought was the same as you, George, is that he was back at 𝗙cie to work on his fitness and get his aerobic fitness up for this. He did his job giving Maxi a chop out in this game. Like Maxi can't run for into finals doing 80-90%. So he did 73% of ruck contests, Maxi, in this, which is still pretty big. 24% to Brodie, and Jacob van Rooyen only had 2. And you don't want him having any more than that. Exactly right. I mean, I thought he was great, JVR. He didn't have big numbers, but I thought his effort was just phenomenal. His will for the contest. And I'll talk about the 𝗙cie game when we get to it. But, comparing him to 𝗟𝗍, it's like they're just like chalk and cheese, because JVR just wants to be in the contest. And again, the wet weather didn't help him. I just looked at the stats thinking, Brodie's game will be heaps better than I thought it was. But he had not a great game really statistically, so I won't even bother to go through them. He only had the 2 score involvements. But Charlie Curnow is an example of, it was a really tough night for forwards. He took 7 marks, which is pretty good, but 5 of them were out in the open, only 2 contested marks. So he didn't have a great night either. He was up against a pretty good player. He only had 2 score involvements, and Brodie had 2. I thought Brodie's. I agree. I thought he didn't have a great game, but his last quarter was super important, because he was the one who won us territory and got the territory back our way. whether 𝗪cie was carrying something or not, or whether, it's just not a night for him where they smash in. So it is a hard game to assess. I 100% agree that you need him in the team. You need another tall, because I think the way to think about it is not these next two games. It's all about what our best 22 is come that first final and then the prelim. Now, whether I had thought that Brodie would be in that team, whether he is, and whether that question is right, whether we can go with a smaller, more medium with Fritters back and running, but we need him up and running in a couple of games before we could even think about that. And so I had in my mind that T-Mac would potentially be the answer. We know Goody likes two tall forwards. I think Brodie will stay in. Having gone to the Casey game, I reckon I would be surprised, to be perfectly honest, if T-Mac plays again this season. He looked miles off at fitness-wise, I have to brutally honest. And certainly not in the home and away season. He'll be really pushing it uphill, and a fair bit of weight to be pushing uphill too, I reckon, to be ready even for the first final, which is no criticism of him at all, because he's had another foot injury. I mean, how does he get any running? He can't run on it. Like what's the 𝗟𝗲𝗀𝗁𝗀? I don't even know what it is. So he looked like that, and he looked out of nick. He was playing from behind. He looked like he was playing like a player who was limited, and so was what I used to do when I played footy, which was sit out the back looking for the deep kick. So 𝗟𝗏 isn't going to come in. There's no way they're going with 𝗟𝗏, and there's no one else. So it's Brodie or bust.
Yep.
Oh, well, sorry, I was on mute. There you have it. Brodie or bust. Go Lordy says, I'm a big Salem fan, but his ball handling seemed to be off this week and some of his kicks. We need to see him in top form for finals. Titus Toddy says, we wouldn't be having this conversation if Salem had just kicked the goal. What was he thinking? And I always thought that if there was any player that I wanted streaming into 50 on his own to win the game off his own boot with minutes to go, it's going to be Salem. And I was disappointed that he didn't get the distance, but it also was offline. And look, there's probably tired legs, wet weather. George, anything to add about Salem's game?
Can't say anything more than that. I agree with you. Of the one player I'd love to have kicking from 50 in the last minute, probably Rivers would be the only other one who could be almost guaranteed. But he's run from the other end of the ground. It's a wet ball. It's the end of the game. It's 119 minutes have been played. He didn't make the distance, but he still kicked at 50, which is a reasonable effort. And we all be singing his praises if he had hit it. But it's just the way the game goes. You can't blame him. There were, as we've said, that there are other opportunities, and we gave them the lead in the first place. So,
he didn't have a great game, but there were a couple of others. Bowie didn't have a great game, I didn't think. Like that's a couple of poor games in a row, and Salo hasn't had a great season either. Like if I talked about the player ratings before, 𝗪cie's averaging 12.7 in his 12 games so far this year. Salo's just a tick over 8, so that's in the bottom third of the best 22. He's coming back from those thyroid. It was also groin. Was it groin injury?
Yeah, he had.
So maybe the depth on his kicking is not quite there, but exactly right. It was late in the game. But what I said before was the query, and maybe it goes to from Go to Woden's comment. He had a bit more time than he needed. He had space around him, and normally that's what he's so brilliant at. He could have run another 5 minutes and made a certainty of the distance. I don't knock him for missing that one, but hopefully he's on the upward trajectory. He's going to improve from this level, is what I'd say.
Lazy says, and this is the last question, another shout out to the Demon Army, cheered their tails off in a 68,000 crowd with mostly Blue fans. Their presence at the city end didn't go unnoticed. And the Demon Army, they put up a brave fight in a sea of blue. I felt we were severely outnumbered on the night. The Blues up and about, their supporters are, but it seemed D fans were well in the minority. And I know it was an away game, and the MCC George will attest to this, was probably Pro D's, but the roar for their goals was deafening. We're second on the ladder. They're versus fifth, and in a finals-like game, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but come on, D's fans, show your support, get down to games. B-Man, your thoughts on the crowd?
Look, I mean, it's hard to know. It's a good crowd. I thought it was only the top of the Ponsford. It was all general admission. So my guess was it was only going to be 55,000 people. So I thought the crowd was very impressive. Actually, I don't know how many Melbourne fans turned up. It was a bit hard to tell because everyone's blue. There's a lot of blue around, so it was a bit hard for them to tell. But absolutely on the Demon Army, because I was in the Ponsford, they were below me, and they were tremendous, and massive shout out to them. It goes to the point about the goal umpiring. You take that away from them. I mean, you've got 70,000 people screaming under pressure in that cauldron. How can we expect umpires to put them in that situation and not help them with the technology if we've got that capacity? But on the Demon Army, shout out to the whole Demon Army crew. They've been a fantastic, for years, but they've been brilliant for the last few years. The energy, I know. Also, shout out, they've had a couple of tragic losses in the Demon Army. So, my thoughts go out to the Demon Army. Also read that 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝗁 came down at 3/4 time and sat with them, and that's something that she does quite often and did in that game. And I think, I might be wrong, but I think I read that she was there in the very last minute as well. So, I think she'd probably be a good person to ask George about whether that was a goal or not. And on that, there's a post to 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗶𝗃 who mentioned that a security guard said to them afterwards, and I presume they were there for a while longer, who she said was a Blues fan, was sitting right under it, and he said there's no way that was touched.
Give us the 4 points.
The discussion will go on
I'm
for
convinced.
years, won't it?
It was a pretty good effort all round for people turning up. 65,000 when the
68,
Matildas were playing. When the Matildas are playing to the biggest television audience Australia has ever seen, and it was pouring down rain before the game on a cold Saturday night. So
and not being on Twitter, George, I didn't bloody realise that they weren't going to show that till after regulation. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to lose my seat, and so I watched pretty much all the first quarter. I was watching the game and watching my phone, watching the soccer. It was brilliant. And I was thinking of you, George, it's gone nuts in Melbourne and Australia around the Matildas. And it just reinforces what you were saying last week about the AFLW. I mean, young women are going to play soccer. We're going to lose them because the AFLW has been mismanaged by the AFL. I've got it in for the AFL tonight, haven't I? I hope they're listening.
They're not listening. Casey. It was Casey's last chance to fight its way back into contention for a vital top 4 place on the ladder with 1 round left before finals. Unfortunately, the Demons fell short by 8 points after a disastrous display in front of goals in the second half against Carlton, completing the Blues' clean sweep of the Demons' men's team over the weekend. Fortunately, our women were able to knock off the Blues on Saturday in a practice match to prevent a blue tsunami. After booting 6 goals from 8 scoring shots to half-time to trail by 9 points, Casey's forward line accuracy fell apart in the second half, kicking 3 goals, 13 to 4 goals, 6 in that period. During the final term, the ball virtually lived in their forward line. Inside 50s was 17-5 in Casey's favour. They managed 1 single goal while the Blues scored in their only 2 forays forward in the first 20 minutes of the quarter. Luke Dunstan was once again prolific in his ball getting and endeavours towards the ball, but not necessarily always in execution. He had 38 disposals, 8 clearances, 7 tackles and kicked a goal. Similarly, James Harms was active with 30 disposals, 1 more than Bailey Laurie, who also had a busy day, along with Charlie Spargo, 28 touches. Tajwo Woden showed the benefits of a stint at AFL level with 25 touches and 7 clearances. In his comeback from a long layoff, Tom McDonald managed just 1 goal, as did youngster Matt Jefferson. Whilst the usually accurate Josh Shackey finished with 3 behinds, Will Verrill battled hard in the ruck and showed a lot of promise for the future with his 17 hit-outs. All in all, however, it was a disappointing result for the Demons, who will rue some narrow defeats late in the season and must now win next weekend against the Brisbane VFL side if they are to avoid a wildcard playoff in a fortnight's time. Demonland's own Webber was at the game, and he says, I watched the game yesterday with Bin Man, and needless to say, in the gorgeous sunshine falling onto a perfectly grassed Princes Park, we, by which I mean he, meaning Bin Man, had happy solutions for all the chinks in the D's armour, all despite Casey falling frustratingly short. Poor goal conversion in the last was the killer. So listen into the podcast, Demonlanders, between Andy's MFCSS in flux, George's rational wisdom, and positive Binner's happy contextualising. It's going to be a cracker. By the by, Harry Petty was there in his moon boot. I doubt he's had surgery yet, and just remember Webber I think he's a physio. They'll be waiting for the acute foot to settle, making for a less irritable reaction pro-surgery. He looked relaxed and happy, as did Max. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗍 was another level yesterday, ran all day, and more than anyone else gave Casey its best looks at a win. Tomo dominant down back as always. So, Bin Man, you ventured down to Icon Park to watch the game with Webber, it seems. What can you tell us, and who impressed you besides Webber's?
Yeah, shout out to Webber. I had
knowledge?
the great pleasure of watching the game with him. Just a thought, though, a couple of thoughts. It was gorgeous. The turf was gorgeous. There was not a breath of wind, and I just thought, I would love to Melbourne have a facility like that. Like it just looked first class. What a place for the players to train. What a place for the fans to come. It was a pretty healthy crowd. I reckon there were, probably 1,500 people there, mainly Blues fans. It was an interesting game. That last quarter of our dominance, that's how people seem to view the first quarter by the Blues. But, it's completely opposite. We just wasted so many chances. It was just so frustrating to watch. Like I went there having put the previous night behind me and, in the beautiful surrounds of Princes Park, and was hoping not to get frustrated. But, it was a bit of a frustrating last quarter. My takeaways was 𝗟𝗄𝗎 looks a long way off. He kept on trying to bust through tackles, and he didn't give a few times. He just doesn't look like he's got his head in the game, it felt like. Whether there's an injury there, whether there's some other stuff, I don't know. But to be honest, there was only one player that I thought was clear. When we've talked about this before, when you watch VFL, when you get that feeling, well, they're a cut above VFL level, and they're clearly AFL. The only two players just watching it, whether they'll come in or not, I don't know, were Tomo and Spargo. Tomo lacks a little bit of pace, and I'm increasingly thinking it was one of the things they really opened us up often just over the ground. I was impressed with their ability to tic-tac the ball down the ground, the Blues, that is. And he's a little bit slow off that first 2 steps. That's probably the weakness. He kicked the ball pretty well, I thought. T-Mac, as I said, I don't think I had hoped he was a legitimate chance to come in. I would say it's 50-50 at best that he'll play another game this season. Brown didn't play, so I'm not even sure where. George, you know where Brown's at injury-wise?
No idea. He was standing. He was in the stands.
Right.
It was a knee, I think, in
I don't think we'll see him any more of him this season.
Yeah. So no one really sort of caught my eye and thought, even Andy Menezes Wakefield didn't have a flash game. We missed a lot of chances. It was actually the last quarter was where it looked like we missed it the most, but we missed some really easy gettable ones where the scoring chains broke down in the third quarter. That was more the thing. The scoring chains just didn't connect up, and we didn't even get the shots on goal. The standout was Charlie Spargo. He worked his guts out. Obviously, I was watching him fairly closely.
Where was he playing to get 28 touches, mind you?
He was on the wing. He played on the wing.
Only for about half the game. The rest of it was high half forward. And he worked his guts out from arc to arc. And his kicking was first class. It was really first class. Did you go? You weren't there, George. Did you go?
No, I watched it on. Yeah. But Spargo was streets above anybody else on the ground for the whole 4 quarters as well. I thought Woden is better than VFL level now. I was impressed with him, a lot of touches. I wasn't impressed with Tomlinson in the same way that you were. Tomlinson, he had 27 touches, but 10 of those were from kickouts.
Yeah,
so,
right. Yeah.
And the other thing that really annoyed me about him was he was getting dragged up the ground constantly by his man, which was probably tactically correct from the Carlton perspective. But that's when Carlton were getting the goals out the back.
Yeah.
How many times Tomlinson was trotting back to the goal square? He was not to be seen. I didn't like what he was doing at all. The other thing, I wasn't impressed with the coaching. Why in the hell Mitch White was playing in the forward line when you got Jefferson, T-Mac and 𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗰𝗀𝗁 all in there? White was, if the only reason I could think of was he's been injured and they're trying to put him in there to give him something to do. He should have been in the midfield. It was just incredible what was going on from my perspective. But I thought there was some really, really bad decisions being made from that point of view. Like what I'm starting to see out of Verrill and Adams and Jefferson.
Adams looks good, and
yeah,
Jefferson didn't set the world on fire, but he took a mark at one point where it was just a pure reading of it. He read the ball so beautifully. And he's sticky hands, and
he's very good at reading the ball. He's always in the right spot, and quite often he takes marks with both feet firmly planted on the ground because nobody else has judged it. I think I said a couple of weeks ago, if he'd learned to jump as well, he could be really damaging in the future. But
it's just on him, George. This time last year, all the talk, we had the same conversation about our forward line. It seems like it's our annual discussion. All the talk was, should we bring JVR in? There's no talk about bringing Jefferson in. He's not.
Yeah, well, his body's not ready yet, and we're even though if he was a big, strong lad, we probably would be. But I'm happy to wait till next year, and it probably won't be till later in the year, if not the year after. But
but at the end of the day, it was 3 goals, 13, and 1 complete miss from a set shot.
And there were a few in the third quarter. There were a few that we didn't even get the shots, where we just muddled it up on the way, in the scoring chain. Jed Adams surprised me a bit. I thought he was bigger. I had it in my mind that he was bigger, but he reads the ball really well, and he looks a natural defender, and he looks like he's got a touch of class about him.
Yep.
But and 𝗟𝗂𝗋 just hasn't got that want for the contest, and he got buffeted a couple of times, and I thought to myself, he's not gonna. I don't think he's in the frame. So
no.
All right, let's talk changes. When it comes to changes this week, in this week's upcoming match against the Hawks, all eyes will be on Brodie Grundy and the Demons forward line. Bigfoot says, I did not get to watch Casey this weekend, but note that T-Mac kicked 1 goal from 3 marks and 10 disposals. Not ideal form off surgery and long stints on the sideline. You've spoken at length about why 𝗟𝗂𝗋 won't be considered for a call-up, so I won't bother asking, and Matt Jefferson is too raw to bring in. So do we leave the forward line as is, or do we break glass and see if T-Mac can add anything in the next 2 weeks? Love the podcast. I'm hoping listening this week will bring me back off the ledge. I think MFCSS is contagious, and I have a bad case. Thanks, Andy. Singer says, really enjoyed the podcast, fellas. Love the different perspectives that you all bring, as well as the commentary and questions from the audience. It really does cover the whole gamut of each game with a good cross-section of the Demon voices, but I digress. Do you think we might see the return of 𝗟𝗏𝗀 to the team, possibly replacing JJ? I really think we miss the pressure that he brings in that high half-forward role. Thanks, Binman. And he is an elite user of the ball by foot. I just wish he got more of the pill. Hopefully those 28 possessions in the twos this week can rub off on his game in the seniors. And we've got the first part of 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗋's voicemail.
Hey boys, it's 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗋 here. I gave you a few weeks off, but thought I'd call back in and give you hopefully some good content. Interested to hear your thoughts about the game. I'm a bit of a fan of Tomo coming back in and keeping Smith permanently forward. I'm keen to hear what you think about that.
Well, if you heard the discussion about the Casey game, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗋, I don't think either of them are too... Oh, well, maybe Binman is, but George certainly isn't. So, George, followed by you, Binman, what changes are we making this week? Our listeners have mentioned T-Back, 𝗟𝗏𝗋 and Tomo. They look like they're probably the only guys that might be considered. So, George, take it away.
Yeah, I think Spargo's an easy in for us. JJ's probably the easy out. I think we'll see Smith stay up forward and Hibberd will go in the back. Who becomes the sub, I don't know at this stage, but I don't think there's going to be any other changes beyond that. T-Mac didn't do enough to be there. I don't think they're going to be dropping Grundy in any for this game at least, but I think that's going to be about the limit of the changes this week.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe JJ does go back to the sub, and that's a role. I mean, Smith's a really interesting one. We've talked about him being the super sub, but I don't
we need him now.
Yeah, we need him.
We need the super part of the sub.
We need him up. Yeah, we need him up forward.
I've always said about him, he's a better up forward because he's he's got average footy IQ. It doesn't matter so much up forward. You can just let him loose, just go for it. You can attack that ball. And someone's got to mind him. He takes another defender out of the game. But the thing that I'm, as I talked about before, increasingly sort of coming to the mind of how important speed is, particularly acceleration, not from a standing start. And he's got that in spades. So I think this is his chance. I've always liked him as a forward, better than a defender. So he's got a real gilt-edged chance to cement his spot in the side. I think that's a really good comment. I'm not sure, I can't remember who made it about Spargo. He probably does need to get more of the pill. His numbers, I think he's averaging only 9 or 10 possessions, and that's not enough. And maybe my feeling is, I was saying this to Weber on Sunday, is my sense of why he's playing in the VFL is he got sent back to get his tank up and to get up to the numbers. He's our Brian, is it Brian or whatever his name, Myers for Geelong. He's the inside 50 kick. Working hard up and down the ground, and in order to get up from 10 possessions of the game to 15, he's got to cover more territory, and I don't think he was covering enough territory. So I think that's what he's going to work on. I'd love personally for him to work on his body language a bit. Even in this game, he just seems to get down on himself too much, Spargo, and I don't think that can ever be a good thing. So I agree, George. I see that's probably the changes, and maybe JJ goes to become sub. I'm not sure.
Probably goes even further because, Hibberd was the sub last week. I think Hibberd did a great job when he came on, completely blanketed Martin. He just fits into the system so well down there, and I'm afraid Smith gets lost.
Yeah, and we need, as you said, we need him up forward, and I just can't see 𝗟𝗄𝗀𝘁 coming in. He just did not play a good game of footy. I know he got 30-odd possessions, but he got tackled 3 or 4 times, which was, that happens, of course. But, he could have given it off and elect to take the hit and, the tackle. And I felt a little bit like he was a fella, I don't know, maybe I'm reading, who'd been told he's not going to be playing finals, perhaps, because it just looked a little bit flat. But maybe I'm misreading that, and maybe he'll come in as the sub, but I'd be pretty surprised, to be honest.
All right, let's get into the preview. Hawthorn have taken a few top 8 scalps in recent weeks, first knocking off the ladder leaders Collingwood and then defeating the Bulldogs, denying them a guaranteed finals berth for another week. The Hawks would love to take another top 4 scalp this week and put the D's plans for a double chance on hold as well. Jane02 says, "Hi, Andy and team. Please don't forget to mention the BCNA, the Breast Cancer Network Australia game this week. It's a major fundraiser for this incredible cause. If you cannot be there, you can purchase a virtual seat. If you haven't experienced this before, it's a day that will stay with you forever." And thanks, Jane, for the heads up on that. I hope they're selling the beanies before the game like last year. I'll definitely be buying one if they are, or I'll be donating anyway. It's a great cause. Many of us have been touched by this horrible illness, whether it's family or friends. I love that our club is very involved in helping create awareness for these causes, whether it's breast cancer awareness or MMD, or even changing the team's name to NAM. I think it's great work by the MFC getting involved in all these social medical causes. Red Jacket says, given that the Hawks are placed in 16th position on the ladder. They have not been on my radar all year, and I have not watched a minute of any of their matches with the exception of their game against the Demons earlier in the season. In the past few weeks, they have piqued my interest as they dismantled the Pies and put a dent in the Dogs' finals aspirations. This is a team that worries me greatly. They have likely sewn up 16th place and therefore will not lose the prize third pick in the draft, and therefore are probably playing like they've got nothing to lose. Well, that's the sense I get from not having watched a minute of them playing in the past few weeks, but you get the gist. So why am I so nervous to play against a team like this? Help put my fears to bed. What do we need to do to defeat these King Slayers? And who do I have to worry about? Bin Man, followed by George.
I think, they worry me too, actually. Two reasons. One, we're coming off this game. And I think the biggest shift in footy is like, the games like that we saw on the weekend used to only be in prelims. I mean, now the teams are having to come up from that, week after week. I'm so glad. That's why it was good that we had the North Melbourne game before that. I think the Blues, for instance, I'm tipping the Suns will beat the Blues this week because they will struggle to come up. If not, the Suns will run them close. Fortunately, the Hawks had a pretty dramatic game as well. It wasn't nearly as physical as our game. In fact, if you're a Doggies fan, you'd be furious at the lack of intensity in that game, I would have thought. However, the Hawks were super intense. They were brilliant. They were right from the get-go. They were at it. The thing that might work in our favour on that front is they've got one less day to recover, and the travel back from Tassie, which is definitely a factor, 100% a factor. Hard for those teams down the bottom to put 2 or 3 matches at that high level together. But they do worry me, and they'll look to do what they did to the Pies, I'm sure. They'll look to spread the ground and really they've got a style of game that Mitchell, who I really rate as a coach, I think he's done a fantastic job. Luke Hodge had a top 5. Had his top 5 coaches for the year under some sort of special source criteria. He had him at 3, which was a bit rich. He didn't have Goody in his top 5, would you believe? But he had Mitchell at 3. But I wouldn't have him at 3. But he's talked Mitchell about a game plan that isn't net for now. It's for the benchmark in 5 years. And so they really look to run the ball by hand and move and spread. But they've also got some gun players through the middle. Will Day he looks like he's going to be a star, and it's hard not to be impressed and love 𝗟𝗋𝗀𝗁. He's just a terrific footballer. A big loss for them is Chad Wingard because he's been in rare form, super skilled, and as we've talked about a lot, a really weakness, or not a weakness, a strength of ours hasn't been playing, covering those medium forwards. So he's a big out for them. I think Mitch Lewis is really their only key forward, so that means it's unlikely Tomo's going to come in because we probably don't need him. So, they definitely, on the MCG against the Collingwood game, they really did look to stretch them. It'll be really fascinating to see what they do with Finn McGuinness. So Finn McGuinness has been, sitting on 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀𝗁 famously, and through in that game on the weekend against the Dogs, which is just a shocking loss for the Dogs to lose that game. He went to various players and put the coolers on them. He played on the Bont at one stage. He played on Liberatore and I forget the other player for the halfback flanker that they have running off the halfback flank, the Dogs. So he'll probably go to, I don't know, George, maybe track. It'll be interesting, maybe Oliver. So that'll be really interesting. Goody doesn't mind that because he'll take Finn McGuinness out of the play. They're definitely a threat. We should win it. If we don't win it, where this is a genuine question about where we're going if we don't win this game. We're a lot better. They're definitely a threat. I don't think there's any risk we'll be taking them easy. The North game is a good heads up for that. A bit will be how we come up from last week is really my sense. They've got the game that can open us up a little bit. Similarly with the Crows, for the same reason the Crows worried me with their pace of ball movement. They've got nothing to lose. They're going to attack and run and but they're also hard at it. So a danger game. I'm really hoping we get going offensively, and I'm really comfortable with where we're at fitness, as I was saying before. I legitimately think that should be the flag favourites, and I'm hoping that's how we'll play on the weekend. And I'm really looking forward to the game.
the threat for me, of course, is they're a young team that is definitely on the up, but got a long way to go yet. And the enthusiasm that they had, that they brought, particularly, they've beaten Collingwood and they've beaten the Dogs in recent weeks. You don't want them to get off to a good start. No. And given that we're talking before about our slow starts, that's exactly what we don't want.
And that's what they did against the Dogs.
Yeah,
they never got headed, really.
Yeah. So if you stop them early on, then you take away that enthusiasm. They do have nothing to lose in this particular game. But if you take away the enthusiasm from that, if they get a couple of goals down, they aren't going to come back like we're capable of doing. So and I think we've just got too much talent all around the ground for them. At the end of the day, I think they'll suffer. With our defence, they depend a fair bit on their mids moving up and creating the opportunities.
And 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁 and Lewis, they're fairly one-dimensional. They're good marks, but you're right. Our zone defence will make it difficult for them.
Yeah.
The big one for them is 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗰. Like, he is in unbelievable form. There's some data around that he's almost like, by some huge margin, the most impactful player. If you take it, their record with him out of the side is unbelievably different to with him in not just win-losses, but across a whole range of metrics. So do you think we'll put someone on him? Or?
I think there is absolutely no doubt that you have to put someone on 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗰. You sacrifice someone's game to stop him. You stop 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁 and they don't get any drive out of their backline. He is fantastic, but the rest of them aren't all that good around the sides of him.
And he uses the ball so much better than May and Lever, I have to say. So I could see them milk running with him and trying to be pretty physical with him and blocking him. And he just got to stop his run. The only problem is that he runs up the ground high, 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁, and so they might have to do a handoff because Milk won't be able to go with him. He won't be able to run up the ground with him at that pace. So, but I suppose if he gets up the ground, he can have his possessions up the ground. It's it's the intercept marks that you've got to stop. It really, isn't it?
Yep.
All right, boys. I think we've done a pretty good job, nearly 2.5 hours. So we're going to leave it there. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing a return to the winners list. If you want to listen to the show live then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to WLS Mojo and Demonologist. Thank you to our YouTube commenters, Borgzilla, D-Me and Will. Thank you to our Instagram peeps for their questions and comment. Thank you to Amy and Nat. Thank you to our voicemailers, Salty. Thank you to our caller, Kieran from Canberra. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Demonized, Clintosaurus, Gunners, Oh My D's, Nairobi Demon, Titus Toddy, Pew Pew Pew, Growl, Sam6172, Go Lordy, Scroll, Lazy, Travi14, Track Forever, Buck Naked, Supreme Demon, Roosted Far from Go to Woden, Bobo, BW511, What, Say What, Smurf, Prestige D, Jabroni, Monocular, Demon Cat, El Diablo 14, D Old Fart, Doug Reamer, Bigfoot Singer, Jane02, and Red Jacket. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Binman. And thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll read it out on the next show. And also don't forget to check out the YouTube channel to watch the show. Just search Demonland Podcast and please like and subscribe to our channel. Well, see you next week. Go Demons.
Go Matildas.
Come on, Demons.